15 years ago, I ended my marriage because I found out my husband was cheating with a childhood friend and even had a child with her. This made me very upset and almost made me quit my job. But during that tough time, my current husband helped me and we made a happy home together. However, my happiness didn't last long. Recently, I saw my ex-husband for the first time in 15 years. He said mean things to me, like I must still be single because nobody would want to marry someone like me who couldn't have kids, but I surprised him by introducing him to my children. When I introduced my son, my ex-husband was shocked and scared. I told him about my life now. I'm Florence, 38 years old. I live with my 13-year-old son Max, my 11-year-old daughter Ava, and my husband David, who is the same age as me. Max is in middle school and going through a rebellious phase. He can be cheeky sometimes, but my husband David knows how to handle him. Ava loves makeup and fashion, and she knows how to get what she wants because she's the youngest and a girl. Max really cares about Ava, so when she jokes about not liking him if he's not nice to me, he quickly apologizes and promises to be good. He's charming and always knows how to make things fun. So, even though my life is busy, it's also full of joy. But there's something people might not know about me. I've been divorced once and am now happily married for the second time. I got divorced because my ex-husband, who I'll call Jack, did something really hurtful. It happened 15 years ago when we were both in college. We were happy together at first, talking about how much we wanted kids and imagining what it would be like to be parents. But even after trying for a while, we didn't get pregnant. Every month, when my period came, it caused tension between us. We tried to figure out why we couldn't have kids, spending a lot of money on treatments, but doctors couldn't find anything wrong. Despite this, my husband started getting frustrated and blaming me for our infertility. He'd say things like, "When will I ever become a father?" and make sarcastic comments that made me feel bad. He stopped helping around the house, saying it was my job because I couldn't have kids. He made me feel like our marriage was pointless because I couldn't fulfill my role as a woman. Afterwards, my husband's words got meaner. He'd say things like, "My sister is having her second baby already. Isn't that great? They're on their second, and we haven't even had our first." He'd look at me with a harsh expression, making fun of me and putting me down. He'd say, "If your body was normal, we have kids by now." I'd try to defend myself, saying we didn't know the reason for our infertility yet, but he'd just say, "It's always the woman's fault for not having babies. If I knew you couldn't have kids, I wouldn't have married you. You should feel guilty." His words hurt me a lot. On top of that, my in-laws would call, excitedly asking when they get a grandchild. At first, I'd try to brush it off, saying it takes time, but it didn't help. My mother-in-law started blaming me, saying I was useless for not having kids yet, especially since my sister-in-law had kids so easily. The pressure from them was overwhelming. One day, my friend Daisy invited me out. Jack, my ex-husband, had been busy with work, so he wasn't around much. That's when Daisy told me something shocking. She said, "I've been wanting to talk to you for a while. I have something important to tell you, Florence. I've missed you too." "What's up, Daisy?" "Remember Grace? She was Jack's childhood friend. They grew up near each other and their families were close. She went to the same college as us and now works with me. Grace, the daughter of the CEO at my job, got her position through family connections. We didn't really hang out in college since we were in different groups, and even at work, we didn't talk much because we worked in different departments. My husband introduced me to her once, calling her his friend and asking me to get along with her. But Grace didn't seem to like me, so I avoided her. Daisy, my friend, told me something surprising about Grace. She said, "I think your husband and Grace are having an affair." I couldn't believe it. Daisy had seen them holding hands, not just like friends. "Are you sure?" I asked. "I think you should find out more," Daisy said, offering to help me talk about it. I had suspected Jack was cheating. He'd always come home late, saying he had to work more. He was never around on weekends, busy entertaining clients. Even though I had a feeling, I tried to ignore it. But after hearing Daisy's warning, I went straight to a detective agency. I wanted proof of his infidelity. Within a week, they had enough evidence. But I wasn't ready to divorce him yet. Despite everything, I still remembered the promises we made to each other. I needed time to decide. A few days later, I got home to find Jack sitting at the dinner table, which was unusual because he usually came home late. "Oh, you're home. I thought you'd be late again," I said sarcastically. "Yeah, sorry about that. I need to talk to you, he replied. Knowing about the affair, I braced myself for bad news. I want a divorce, he said. What? I was shocked. I realized he wasn't just fooling around, he was serious about Grace. Grace is pregnant. I'm going to marry her, he added. I couldn't believe it. He had always said Grace was just a friend. Jack didn't seem to think he did anything wrong. He even said, "My mom wants me to divorce you. She thinks Grace is better because she's prettier and can have kids." Hearing this hurt a lot. Tears filled my eyes as Jack left, saying he was going back to Grace. I was too hurt to stop him. Later, I got divorce papers in the mail, with a note from Grace asking me to divorce Jack. It felt like a slap in the face. I wanted to say, "No. You're the one who took my husband." But I realized arguing wouldn't change anything. I was left with so many questions. Why was I being blamed? I couldn't just accept the divorce quietly. Determined to stand up for myself, I used the evidence I gathered from the detective agency to start divorce mediation. A few days after filing, I got a call from an unknown number. When I answered, I heard Grace, Jack's mistress, yelling at me. She was furious that I had started a lawsuit. I calmly explained that it was the right thing to do given the situation and that I knew about her inappropriate behavior. She demanded compensation, even though she was pregnant. Her harsh words hurt me deeply. I told her we could discuss everything officially during the divorce mediation. In the mediation, the court recognized Jack and Lee's relationship as infidelity based on the evidence. Jack tried to blame my infertility. The court didn't buy it because there was no proof of my infertility within just a year of marriage. In the end, I received $220,000 as alimony from Jack and $110,000 from Grace. After finalizing the divorce, I hoped to move on, but the aftermath was far from over. The affair between Jack, Grace, and me became gossip among our friends, especially since we all went to the same university. Shockingly, some rumors suggested I hid my infertility and tricked Jack into marrying me. Some friends even sympathized with Jack and Grace, which felt awful. The situation got worse at work because Lee, Grace's father, was my company's president. Grace portrayed herself as a victim, spreading lies about me hiding my infertility and demanding alimony while she was pregnant. Despite trying to ignore it, I faced backlash at work. My bosses favored Grace because of her influential family, and I was sidelined from important projects. Eventually, I felt forced to resign. While job hunting, another company recognized my skills and offered me a position. Here, I thrived beyond expectations. My new boss valued me for my abilities, unlike my previous workplace, which favored nepotism. I found myself drawn to this boss, who turned out to be my current husband, David. David was my rock during the tough times after my breakup with Jack. We spent a lot of time together, talking about everything from work to personal matters, and our bond grew into love. When David proposed, I was thrilled, but I was also scared of facing infertility again. I confessed this fear to him, and he reassured me, saying that he loved me no matter what and that having children wasn't the most important thing to him. Feeling truly happy and loved, I decided to marry David. Shortly after our wedding, we were blessed with our first child, Max, followed by our daughter, Aha. Despite the challenges of parenting, we were content and happy every day. Years later, at a friend's wedding, I unexpectedly saw my ex-husband for the first time in 15 years. I was startled to see him there, but then I remembered that the bride and groom were also our university friends, so it wasn't surprising that he was there too. I tried to ignore him as I walked by, but he called out to me loudly, catching my attention. "Hey, what's up?" Jack said loudly, possibly drunk, as he spoke to me. "Surprised to see you here, it's been a while. Looks like you've put on some weight, huh?" he added, spraying a bit as he talked. I silently rolled my eyes at his sarcastic comment. Then Jack called over his family, including Grace and her son. Grace laughed when she saw me and joked, "Wow, it's been ages. Have you been stress eating? You've gained some weight, huh? Life's been a roller coaster, hasn't it? And still no luck with having kids, right? Tough luck, huh?" Their rude comments left me speechless with shock. Then I noticed Grace's son blushing and looking down with embarrassment. He was quite handsome. I realized I hadn't introduced him yet. "This is my son," Grace proudly announced. "He's cute, right? Takes after me. And he's not just good looking, he's really smart too, a little genius." "Looks like we're the only ones happy here, huh?" Jack and Grace laughed, proudly showing off their son. But I noticed something off about their son's expression. He seemed uncomfortable with his parents' behavior, growing increasingly dissatisfied with their mocking attitude. He must be a kind-hearted child, I thought to myself. But I didn't have time for them. Just as I was about to leave, Jack grabbed my arm tightly. "You divorced me because of infertility, yet you took money from us," he said, still holding on to a grudge from 15 years ago. Then Grace chimed in, "Yeah, you're infertile and single. Why do you need money? Families like us with children need it more. Give us back double the money you took." Their selfishness stunned me. Suddenly, Jack's son spoke up, pointing out, "Single means unmarried, right? But she's wearing a wedding ring on her left hand." Everyone's attention turned to my left hand, where I wore a wedding ring. Jack and Grace stared in shock. "You're married?" they exclaimed loudly, causing a scene. Feeling embarrassed by the scene Jack and Grace caused, I was unsure what to do. Suddenly, my son Max and daughter Ava appeared, concerned about my lateness. Ava, always outspoken, was joined by Max, who rarely spoke up so boldly. "Mom, you're late, and you have kids?" Max asked, surprising me with his directness. "Yes, I do. Let me introduce them. This is my son Max and my daughter Ava." Jack and Grace were shocked to see the children of the woman they thought couldn't have kids. Grace looked closely at my son, and after a moment, they began to speak in a more mature tone, though their voices sounded strained. They seemed curious about Max's uniform. "He came straight from school with my husband, so he's still in his uniform. And yes, he goes to that famous private middle school," I explained. "Max worked hard and wanted to try for it, so we let him take the exam. He passed and has been attending since this year." Indeed, Max excelled academically and was enrolled in a prestigious local school. "No way, he can't be your son," my daughter exclaimed, joining the conversation. "She plans to take the same school's exam next year," I added proudly. "Yeah, and Max is amazing. He won a violin contest," Ava chimed in. "Violin? I thought I recognized him. He was on TV recently," Grace exclaimed. "Oh, you saw that?" "Yes, he's been getting quite a bit of media attention lately. He was coming back from violin practice today," I explained. Grace and my ex-husband were speechless. "You were supposed to be infertile. How could you have children like this?" Jack protested. "We're all happy now, and that's what matters. Let's not involve each other anymore," I said firmly, ready to leave with my kids. Just then, my husband David arrived. Jack's face went pale at the sight of him. "Is your husband by any chance the young Mr. Lopes who became the president of Resident last year?" Jack asked, recognizing David. Indeed, David was the president of a company that had ties with Grace's father's firm. I had switched jobs and met David there. Last year, he was appointed as the president of the company, recommended by the then president. "Ah, I'm Lopez," my husband introduced himself, confused by the tense atmosphere. Sensing the tension, Max explained, "We heard these people calling Mom infertile and fat, so Ava and I came to help her out." I realized they must have overheard my ex-husband and his wife insulting me earlier. My husband's expression hardened as he realized the situation. "I heard rumors, but I didn't expect a lack of decency," he said firmly. Jack started making excuses, trying to flatter my husband, while Grace protested. They began arguing, and their son, who had been silent, finally spoke up. "Let's stop this already. It's terrible how you're talking about this lady, calling her fat and infertile, and demanding money back. It's embarrassing for me," he said tearfully. "And what's this about an affair? Am I a child born from an affair? Am I an unwanted child?" he continued, his voice full of anguish. Jack and Grace became visibly unsettled. "Oh well, it's not like that." Grace tried to defend herself, but she couldn't ignore the stares from the other guests. Blushing deeply, she looked down in embarrassment. Though I couldn't forgive Jack and Grace, I admired their son for his sense of justice and kindness. Wanting to support him, I was about to speak, but my husband spoke up first. "Thank you for standing up for my wife and defending her from insults. You're a kind child," my husband said, patting the boy's head. With a smile, I decided to speak up too. "But maybe I am a bit chubby. However, that's not the point. Actually, I'm pregnant," I announced, gently stroking my belly. I was already pregnant with our third child. At that time, I was on maternity leave. Turning to the tear-filled eyes of the boy, I continued, Your mom also nurtured you in her belly with great care. You're not an unwanted child. Your mom and dad love you and are proud of you, right? Looking at Jack and Grace, I waited for their response. The boy looked at them hopefully and asked, "Really?" Jack and Grace quickly nodded, assuring him, "Yes, yes. You're our pride. You're very important to us." Seeing the boy smile, I felt a sense of relief. "Let's get back to our seats for now." "It's a day of celebration," I suggested. Each family returned to their seats, and the chaotic scene came to an end. The wedding concluded successfully, and as we headed to the station, Grace and Jack approached us with their son, holding hands. Max and Ava had been protective of me, but my husband chuckled and calmed them down. Grace and Jack offered their apologies. "Sorry about everything. We truly regret our actions today." "Thank you for earlier," they said. It was the first apology I had received from them in 15 years. Perhaps having a child had changed them a bit. I just laughed and said, "Really? After all this time?" With that, I turned my back on them and began to walk away. Max offered to carry my bags, taking the one marked with maternity. Ava cheerfully dragged a coat over my shoulders. Despite their young age, they were looking out for me during my pregnancy. "All right, tonight's dinner will be Dad's homemade hamburgers, Max and Ava's favorite." "Thank you." I vowed to protect the smiles of my beloved family, leaving behind the pains of the past.
"You must have lost your way," were the chilling words Marla uttered, her voice laced with faux concern as I found myself unable to enter my own home, my key futile against the new locks. I stood frozen on the porch, disbelief and anger brewing inside me as I stared at the smug expression on my mother-in-law's face. At 58, Marla still exuded an air of aristocracy and old money, draped in designer clothes and jewelry that sharply contrasted my casual, thrift store-inspired style. "What's going on, Marla?" I asked, struggling to keep my voice even. "Why can't I get into my house?" "Oh, sweetie, I think you're confused," Marla replied, her words dripping with condescension. "This is my son Elliot's house. Now why don't you run along home to your little apartment?" My hands curled into fists as I fought the urge to grab Marla and force my way inside. This was the house I had grown up in, that my parents had left to me when they passed away last year. Elliot and I had spent the last 6 months renovating it, infusing each room with special touches that represented our shared vision for our future. This was my sanctuary, my pride and joy. And now Marla was trying to take it all away. "Don't play games with me," I said sharply. "You know very well this is my house. Now open the door and let me in." Marla sighed theatrically. "I'm afraid that's simply not possible. You see, Elliot signed the house over to me for safekeeping while he's away on business. We can't have undesirables barging in now, can we?" My blood boiled at her words. Elliot, my husband of 5 years, was currently on an extended work trip in Japan. He always fretted about me being alone, but I cherished my independence. Little did I know, he had made arrangements behind my back and given his manipulative mother total control in his absence. I took a deep breath, willing myself to remain calm. "Elliot would never sign over my house without talking to me first." "You're lying, Marla." "Am I?" she challenged, her brown eyes glinting. "Why don't you give my darling son a call and find out?" I wanted nothing more than to wipe that smug look off Marla's face. But I wouldn't give her the satisfaction of seeing me crumble. "Fine. I'll call Elliot and clear this whole thing up," I replied evenly. "But don't get too comfortable in my home. You won't be staying long." Marla merely chuckled and waved her fingers at me in farewell. As I walked down the front steps, I turned to see her disappear inside, closing the door firmly behind her. Rage and disbelief warred within me as I stood on the sidewalk, staring at the house I had poured my heart into. Marla had always resented my common upbringing, believing her precious architect son could do better than a freelance graphic designer. But I never imagined her snobbery and disdain would manifest in something so cruel. I scrolled through my contacts until I found Elliot's number. He answered on the 3rd ring, his cheerful voice like a balm to my soul. I quickly explained what had happened with Marla. A heavy silence followed, broken only by Elliot's deep sigh. "Corinne, there's something I have to tell you." "I can't believe you would do this to me," I said, my voice trembling as I paced the small confines of my studio apartment. On the video call, Elliot looked back at me helplessly. I'm so sorry, Corinne. I never meant for it to happen this way. My mother ambushed me with the paperwork just as I was leaving for the airport. She claimed it was just a temporary measure for emergencies. I didn't realize she had other plans. I raked my fingers through my hair in frustration. Your mother has always hated me. How could you think giving her any control over my house was a good idea? You're right. I messed up, Elliot admitted. I let my mother manipulate me, and you're paying the price. I sighed, my anger dissipating. I knew Marla's conniving ways all too well. Well, it's done now. We need to focus on getting my house back. I'll be home as soon as I can. We'll sort this out, I promise, Elliot replied. We said our goodbyes, and I sank down onto my lumpy mattress, wondering how I had gone from renovating my childhood home to being effectively homeless in just one day. Over the next few days, I settled into a routine. Each morning, I stopped by the house, knocking loudly despite knowing Marla wouldn't let me in. I needed her to know I wasn't going anywhere. Afternoons were spent at coffee shops, using their Wi-Fi to work on freelance design projects. Evenings were reserved for takeout food and strategizing my next moves with my friend Julia over the phone. Nearly a week had passed when I returned to the house one morning to find the front door unexpectedly ajar. I entered cautiously, surprised by the drastic changes that had already taken place. The beautiful pottery and artwork I had proudly displayed were gone, replaced by garish paintings I recognized from Marla's previous home. My cozy, bohemian furnishings had disappeared, swapped for stiff, antique pieces that exuded cold formality. "Hello, dear, I hope you like what I've done with the place." Marla's falsely sweet voice rang out as she sashayed into the room. I bit my tongue to stop myself from screaming at her. "Didn't take you long to make yourself at home," I said bitterly. "Well, it is my home now," Marla replied snidely. "Anyway, I'm hosting the Ladies' Society tea here tomorrow. I assume you can show yourself out?" I stood there fuming as she prattled on about plans for redecorating the kitchen and removing the flower garden I had painstakingly nurtured. It was clear she intended to erase any trace of me from this house, from my colorful tiles in the bathroom to the secret hideout Elliot and I had built as kids. "Just remember, this isn't over," I told Marla as I left, catching a glimpse of her scowling before the door slammed shut behind me. As I walked back to my car, I took some deep breaths, trying to regain my composure. I knew Marla's scheme was only beginning, and I would need to be strategic and resilient to survive this battle. But as I caught sight of my childhood home one last time, I made a vow. One way or another, I was taking back what was mine. The next few weeks were agonizing. Marla's presence seemed to infest every aspect of my life, no matter how hard I tried to avoid her. She hijacked the weekly neighborhood potluck, critiquing my common potato salad recipe and insisting on upscale catering instead. When I volunteered at the community garden, she was suddenly everywhere, gossiping loudly about my unladylike appearance. At the grocery store one day, I overheard her telling the cashier about Elliot's gold-digging wife who married him for his money. I had to stop myself from dumping my cart of items over her primly styled hair. The final straw came when she crashed the annual fundraising gala for the youth art program I had helped launch. I was mingling with donors when Marla appeared, interrupting every conversation to shift focus towards herself. "You'll have to excuse my daughter-in-law's eccentric taste in fashion," she simpered to a businessman I was speaking with. "I do wish Elliot had chosen someone a bit more polished, but we make do." I clenched my fist tightly around my champagne glass to stop it from shaking. The past few weeks of Marla's non-stop attacks had pushed me to my breaking point. I wanted nothing more than to scream at her to stop ruining my life, but I knew that's exactly what she wanted, a public spectacle that made me look deranged. So I quietly excused myself from the conversation and slipped outside, taking deep breaths of the cool night air. I tried Elliot's number again, but my call went straight to voicemail. With his long hours and remote job site, our communication had dwindled to quick check-ins and fuzzy video calls. I had never felt more alone. I steeled myself and went back inside, avoiding Marla for the rest of the evening. When I arrived home that night, I realized she had escalated her sabotage. A large moving truck was parked outside, and two burly men were hauling my furniture and belongings out the front door. "What are you doing?" I cried, rushing over. "Just doing a bit of redecorating, dear," Marla called out from the porch, smirking. "I donated your tacky old things to charity. Don't worry, the new items will be much more elegant." I helplessly watched years of my collected items disappear into the truck. The quilt my grandmother had stitched, the retro table Elliot had refurbished for my birthday, the overstuffed sofa covered in memories. Soon, nothing remained but empty rooms and the biting scent of fresh paint. Numbly, I entered my tiny apartment. Any remaining energy had been sapped, replaced by a cold sense of hopelessness. I had tried to fight back subtly against Marla, but at every turn she had outmaneuvered me. As I lay in bed that night, darkness clawing at the edges of my mind, a single thought emerged like a flicker of light. If I couldn't win by playing nice, it was time to get tough. Marla wanted a war? That's exactly what she would get. The next morning, I began to plan my counterattack. I sat staring in disbelief at the legal document in my hands, the words blurring together. Marla hadn't just manipulated her way into my home. She had actually made herself a co-owner through fraudulent means. According to the paperwork, she had produced a handwritten will, supposedly left by my late father, stating he wanted Marla to have joint custody of the house. But I knew without a doubt it was fake. My father had made me the sole beneficiary in his official will, leaving me the house and small inheritance. Marla had woven an elaborate scheme to steal everything. I sucked in a sharp breath, trying to calm the rage bubbling inside me. After speaking with my lawyer, I now understood the full extent of Marla's deceit. She had been planning this for a while, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. And I had played right into her hands by not having my own name added to the property records once I inherited it. Marla must have fabricated the will, bribed an official, and then coerced Elliot into signing over temporary rights in his absence. She knew I didn't have the proper legal documentation to fight back, or the money for a prolonged legal battle. I had spent the last few days camped out in my car near the house, only leaving to use the gym showers and pick up snacks. I was determined to confront Marla face to face about her duplicity. When her Cadillac finally pulled into the driveway, I leaped out of my car and rushed over before she could escape inside. "Well, look who it is," Marla sneered. "Come to beg for money, or just to admire my lovely new landscaping?" "Cut the act, Marla," I snapped. "I know what you did. You forged a will so you could steal my house." I waved the document in her face. Marla glanced at it casually, then met my gaze with an icy stare. "I have no idea what you're talking about, but clearly the stress has become too much for you." She spoke slowly, as if addressing a child throwing a tantrum. "Enough!" I shouted, finally losing my cool. "That will is fake, and you know it. My father would never have left you anything. You're a lying, manipulative thief." For a long moment we stood there, eyes locked, the truth hanging nakedly between us. Then Marla's lips curled into a sinister smile. "Sweet, naive girl. Even if what you're alleging is true, do you really think you can stop me? I hold all the power now. The law, money, status, it's all on my side." She leaned in close, her cultured voice dropping to a venomous hiss. "Face it, you don't belong here. Why don't you crawl back to the gutter where you came from?" I recoiled at her words, the pain cutting deeply. But the initial anguish quickly transformed into iron resolve. I had tried handling this legally and ethically, and it had failed. Now it was time for a new strategy, no matter how extreme. Marla seemed to sense the shift in me. For the first time, a shadow of uncertainty flickered across her face. I gave her a thin smile. "You're right about one thing, Marla. You've held all the power until now, but that ends today." I turned and walked away, leaving her standing agape on the sidewalk. I had a lot of planning to do and nothing to lose. The time had come for war. Over the next few weeks, I became consumed with gathering evidence against Marla. I knew I needed hard proof of her deceit if I had any hope of reclaiming my house legally. I started with the fake will, working with a lawyer friend to analyze the document. We discovered anomalies. The wrong type of paper, a font that didn't exist when my father was alive. It was enough to cast serious doubts about its authenticity. Next, I reached out to my father's old business partner, someone I knew Marla had been cozying up to for years. After some persuasion, he finally admitted she had asked him to act as a witness and verify the will. The final piece fell into place. I also began trailing Marla, documenting her activities and conversations. Most days she flitted aimlessly around town, a bored socialite looking to stir up drama. But she seemed to have a weekly appointment that piqued my interest, a visit to a rundown apartment building on the edge of town. One overcast Tuesday, I followed Marla's Cadillac to the familiar spot and watched her disappear inside. A few minutes later she emerged looking worried, accompanied by a squat, nervous-looking man I recognized as the town clerk. After exchanging whispered words and passing a thick envelope, they quickly parted ways. My mind raced with possibilities. Blackmail? Bribery? Either way, this man clearly knew secrets that could threaten Marla's polished veneer. Over the next few weeks, I continued tailing Marla, compiling a detailed record of her activities and odd meetings. Her mask of aristocracy and moral superiority had slipped, revealing deceit and corruption. I wanted it all exposed. The final piece fell into place when I convinced the nervous clerk to meet me one night for drinks. A few rounds later, his lips started to loosen, confessing how Marla had paid him handsomely over the years to conveniently lose certain records and speed along questionable documents. Armed with this arsenal of evidence, I requested an emergency hearing with the judge overseeing my house dispute. My lawyer and I laid out the paper trail of fraud and deception Marla had perpetrated to gain control. After reviewing the proof, the judge agreed to freeze all actions relating to the property's ownership until a full investigation could be completed. For the first time in months, I felt empowered again. The law had failed me before, but now justice finally seemed within reach. Marla must have realized her scheme was unraveling. She became a ghost, her usual swarm of social activity ceasing. No more smug morning jogs past my car. No more popping into restaurants to loudly discuss her summer plans for my home improvements. But her disappearance didn't fool me. I knew this temporary retreat was just the quiet before the storm, a chance for her to strategize how she could regain the upper hand. Well, I was done being strategic. Marla wanted an all-out war, I would give her one. And this time, only one of us was walking away victorious. The day of the showdown arrived. Armed with my evidence, I marched up to the front door of my house, ready to confront Marla for the last time. Before I could knock, the door swung open abruptly. Marla stood there scowling, clearly perturbed that I had caught her off guard. "What do you want now?" she snapped. "We need to talk," I replied evenly. "May I come in?" Marla hesitated before reluctantly stepping aside. I crossed the threshold, my emotions swirling as I stood in the home that had been stolen from me. Nothing looked familiar anymore. My bohemian decor had been replaced by gaudy antiques and impersonal minimalism. But underneath Marla's superficial touches, the heart and bones of the home remained. The flow of the rooms my mother had designed, the creaks in the floorboards my father had never fixed. I took a deep breath. "I know what you did, Marla. The will was fake. You bribed the clerk. You have no legal right to my house." Marla scoffed. "You have no proof of these ridiculous allegations. I'm growing very tired of your harassment." I held her icy gaze unflinchingly. "Actually, I have plenty of proof. Sworn statements exposing your lies, records of your shady dealings. I know enough to destroy your facade of respectability." Marla's defiant expression wavered slightly. I pressed my advantage. "It's over. Your schemes stop now. Vacate my home immediately, or I take this evidence to court and ensure you face charges." Heavy silence descended as Marla stared at me stone-faced. For a moment I thought she might actually acquiesce. Then her lips curled into a sneer. "Do you think a few pieces of paper can scare me? I built an empire while you still clung to your parents' apron strings. No one will believe the delusional ramblings of a petty little—" "Mom, stop." We both turned in shock at the newcomer's voice. Elliot stood in the doorway, suitcase in hand, his face etched with grief and disappointment. Marla's haughty demeanor instantly melted. "Elliot, you're home early." She scurried over, attempting an embrace. He held up a hand. "I heard enough, Mom. Corinne told me everything. How could you betray me like this?" "She's lying." Marla shrieked, pointing a manicured finger my way. "I'm the victim here. This vindictive girl has done nothing but spew vicious untruths since the day you married her." "No more lies," Elliot thundered. "I made excuses for you my whole life, but I won't let you hurt my family anymore." He moved to stand by my side, slipping his hand into mine. Marla gaped at him in disbelief. "Darling, please, be reasonable," she implored, her voice cracking. "I'm done being reasonable," Elliot replied wearily. "This ends today. Vacate Corinne's home now and never bother us again." Marla stared wildly between us, the madness clear in her eyes. For a moment I thought she might lash out physically in a final desperate act, but Elliot's stoic presence kept her contained. Finally, her shoulders slumped in defeat. Without another word, she shoved past us and disappeared into the guest room, emerging minutes later with 2 hastily packed suitcases. Elliot kept his eyes trained on the floor as his mother paused next to him, waiting for some show of affection, forgiveness, anything. But he remained stony and silent. The click of her heels faded as Marla retreated down the walk. I watched through the window as her Cadillac glided away, disappearing around the corner, perhaps for the last time. In the weeks following Marla's eviction, Elliot and I worked non-stop to reclaim the house. We boxed up her garish furnishings and listed them for sale, using the money to restore the cozy bohemian aesthetic I had lovingly created. Elliot immersed himself in repairing the structural damage Marla had wreaked, while I scrubbed away every trace of her, wanting to cleanse the home of her poisonous presence. We received regular vitriolic calls and texts from Marla, who was now living in a budget motel on the edge of town. Her life of leisure had been permanently disrupted. With her web of lies exposed, old social contacts had abandoned her. Even the lawyers she approached refused to represent someone with her reputation. She was well and truly friendless for the first time in her privileged life. I almost felt pity seeing how far the once untouchable socialite had fallen. But the sting of her cruelty and deception still burned too freshly. "Maybe we should change the locks and security codes, just in case," I suggested to Elliot one evening, after an especially nasty series of messages from Marla blaming us for her downfall. Elliot nodded warily. "Yeah, it's probably not a bad idea. She's clearly becoming more unhinged." We were sipping coffee the next morning when we heard the pounding at the front door. I jumped nervously, but Elliot gave my hand a reassuring squeeze as we made our way to the foyer. I peered through the side window and groaned. Marla stood on the porch. Mascara streaked down her cheeks, clutching a bulging folder of papers. Her fist pummeled the door relentlessly. I swung it open, noting Marla swayed slightly in her impractical stiletto heels. "What do you want, Marla?" Elliot asked with forced patience. "I want back what's owed to me," Marla shrieked. "This is my home, too. I have a legal right." She shook the folder violently at us. I stifled a bitter laugh. "Still clinging to the lies, Marla? That forged will didn't work before. It won't work now." Marla's bloodshot eyes narrowed. "Oh, this has nothing to do with the will. I'm referring to my claim as co-signer on this property's mortgage." She flashed a smug grin as Elliot and I exchanged stunned looks. In all the drama, we had overlooked this crucial financial detail. Sensing our realization, Marla cackled. "You didn't actually think I'd hand over my main leverage so foolishly, did you? As long as I'm tied to that mortgage, I have a path back in. So I suggest—" "No need. The mortgage has been paid off." Elliot's calm words cut through Marla's tirade. Her face went slack. What are you talking about?" she stammered. "I liquidated my inheritance and paid off the entire mortgage 2 days ago," Elliot explained, crossing his arms. "You have no claim here anymore." Marla stared at him in disbelief as the folder of papers slipped from her grasp, scattering across the porch. "It's over, Mother," Elliot stated firmly. "Now please leave before I have to call the police." For once, Marla had no venomous retort, no more schemes to wield. She backed away silently, teetering on her heels as she retreated to her weathered car. Elliot slipped his arm around me as we watched her go. I leaned my head on his shoulder, feeling the sunlight wash over us, bathing everything in hopeful clarity. Perhaps this drawn-out war was finally nearing its end. And emerging from the rubble, Elliot and I had somehow found each other again. The weeks after Marla's final defeat passed in a blur. Elliot and I threw ourselves into restoring normalcy, filling the rooms with love and light once more. We unpacked my eccentric art and vintage finds from storage, arranging them alongside Elliot's architectural drawings and photography. The house slowly began to feel like ours again. Workers helped repair the structural damage and cosmetic sabotage Marla had caused in her zealous renovations. Elliot redesigned parts of the space to be more accessible for any future children we hope to have. Meanwhile, I returned to pursuing my freelance graphic design work, setting up a small home studio. It felt healing to nurture my own passion again. Within a few months, I had built up a robust client list and transitioned my work into a thriving online business. Elliot and I also focused on strengthening the bonds Marla had strained, hosting potlucks with generous neighbors who forgave my absence, having long talks with friends to clear up her malicious gossip. To our relief, we received word that Marla planned to move to another state permanently, wanting a fresh start far removed from her ruined reputation here. We changed the locks one final time, just in case. On a sunny Saturday afternoon, we finally declared the house restored. To celebrate, we hosted an elaborate backyard barbecue. Twinkling lights were strung across the trees, music filled the air, and laughter carried on the breeze. It was a new beginning for everyone. Amongst the festivities, Elliot surprised me by dropping to one knee, presenting me with his late grandmother's ring set in a new band. "I know we've been through so much hardship already as a married couple," he began emotionally, "but I wanted to give you this as a symbol of a fresh start. So will you renew our vows with me?" Through joyful tears, I said yes, embracing my husband tightly. The people around us broke into cheers and applause. It felt like all the brokenness was truly behind us. On a cool evening a few weeks later, we held an intimate lakeside ceremony as the sun set brilliantly behind the trees. Surrounded by close friends and neighbors, we recommitted ourselves to each other after all we had endured. The struggles of the past year had tested us in every way possible, but ultimately the shared trauma had reforged an unbreakable bond between Elliot and I. Later that night, I rested my head contentedly on my husband's chest as we swayed together under the fairy lights twinkling on our back patio. "No matter what she tried, your mother could never destroy this," Elliot said softly, pulling me closer. I smiled up at him. Our love was always stronger than her hate. He leaned down and kissed me tenderly, the adoration in his eyes washing away any remaining shadows of the past. As we turned slowly on the dance floor, the glow from our home enveloped us in warmth. The house was no longer just brick and wood. It now embodied our resilience. With Elliot's hand firmly grasping mine, I knew I had the strength to withstand anything life threw our way next. Marla's bitterness had forged us into warriors, and together we had emerged victorious. "Worthless," Aunt Clara muttered under her breath as she strode past me, not even attempting to lower her voice. I glanced up from my sketchbook just in time to see the disdain written across her face before she turned away. I looked down again quickly, gripping my pencil tighter while trying to ignore the knot forming in my stomach. I sat tucked away in the back corner of my aunt and uncle's overcrowded living room, sketching quietly during our family's monthly gathering. All around me, chatter and laughter echoed off the walls as my relatives socialized, doused in a healthy glow of wine. I did my best to make myself small and unnoticed. It wasn't difficult. I'd had 15 years of practice. "Did you see Theo's last game, though?" My mom's voice rang out loudly from the kitchen. 2 touchdowns. They won by a landslide. A chorus of cheers and congratulations erupted in response. I snuck a glance across the room at my cousin holding court over a captive audience, grinning from ear to ear. His Letterman jacket hung proudly over the back of his chair, trophy glinting under the lights. I looked back at my sketchbook just as Aunt Clara walked by again. She stopped short this time, narrowing her eyes as she spotted my work. "Still scribbling away as usual, I see," she noted in a tone that landed somewhere between curiosity and disgust. "Don't you have homework to be doing or something?" I pressed my lips together, staring intently at my paper. "I've finished it already." Well, I suppose it's harmless enough," she dismissed with a wave of her ring-laden hand before walking away. The knot in my stomach twisted tighter. Her words echoed in my ears. Worthless, harmless. I knew she thought both about me and my art. Somewhere deep down, I feared the worst part was she could be right. I jumped as a gentle hand grasped my shoulder. I looked up to see Uncle Max's kind eyes peering down at me through his thick glasses. "Don't listen to her, Lila," he said softly. "I think what you create is lovely." I managed a small smile in return, comforted more by the solidarity of his gaze than the compliment itself. Uncle Max was the only one who ever bothered to look closely at my drawings. He seemed to understand the pangs of being overlooked amid the symphony of other people's noise. As he gave my shoulder a supportive squeeze before walking away, I realized this monthly gathering marked the third in a row he had offered me those same gentle words. Don't listen to her. His reassuring gestures were becoming something of a ritual, I mused. One I appreciated more deeply each time. The lively hum of the party clambered on around me, but I felt cocooned by Uncle Max's kindness. I allowed myself to become reabsorbed by the strokes of my pencil, applying darker depth and definition to the portrait emerging on my page. I didn't hear Aunt Claire approach until her shadow was upon me. I swear, Lila, it's like you live in your own little world sometimes, she scoffed, craning her neck to catch a glimpse of my work. What are you making that's got you so tuned out anyway? Before I could respond, she snatched the sketchbook from my lap, already laughing. Oh, honey, when are you going to grow up? She cried loudly, her shrill voice cutting through the din. You can't pay the bills with silly little doodles like this. Faces turned in our direction as heat flooded my cheeks. I stared hard at the floor, willing myself not to cry as a few stray snickers arose. Aunt Clara carelessly dropped my sketchbook back in my lap and strode away, gravelly laugh still spilling from her lips. Why put in so much effort for something so worthless? She called over her shoulder. The words pierced my fragile pride, every letter another knife twist to my heart. I hugged my sketchbook tightly to my chest, barely holding back tears. Maybe she was right after all. Pass the potatoes, please, Aunt Clara demanded, her shrill voice cutting through the chatter around the dinner table as she leaned back in her seat. I quietly handed her the platter, avoiding eye contact and hoping to avoid provoking another of her cutting remarks. It was Thanksgiving, after all. The one day of the year our family insisted on coming together despite the simmering tensions. My hope of getting through dinner unscathed was short-lived. As usual, the conversation quickly turned to comparing my lackluster achievements to Theo's latest accolades. Theo made varsity quarterback as a sophomore. Uncle Ralph boasted loudly between bites of turkey and stuffing. Youngest one in years. He's the real deal. A round of hearty congratulations followed as Theo grinned, basking in the glow of adoration and free-flowing wine. I told you he'd be the star of the family, Aunt Clara joined in gleefully. Brains and talent, he has it all, not to mention that beautiful girlfriend of his. She let out an exaggerated sigh. My, they will have the cutest baby someday. Can't you just picture it? More laughter and smiles of agreement rippled around the long table. I sank lower in my chair and pushed a few peas around my plate, face burning. His life did seem pretty perfect, I admitted resentfully to myself. Quarterback, straight A's, leggy blonde doting on his every word. With a dejected exhale, I let my eyes wander around the room, carefully avoiding the golden boy himself. As an involuntary reflex, my gaze landed on my sketchbook, peeking out from my bag in the corner behind Uncle Max's wingback chair. Just like its owner, tucked away, forgotten, worthless. At that moment, Aunt Clara's grating voice cut through my gloom. It's such a shame not all young people live up to their potential. My eyes snapped to hers at the other end of the table. Her expression feigned sympathy, but I saw the malice flashing behind it. Poor Lila just drifts through life. I don't know how she'll ever amount to anything meaningful without some sparks flying up in that head of hers. Cold dread crept down my spine at the thinly veiled insult. Before I could open my mouth to respond, I felt a large hand firmly grasp my knee under the table. Uncle Max subtly shook his head, silently warning me not to engage. I bristled in frustration but held my tongue. Max gave my leg a supportive squeeze before removing his hand. Well, what about David? Aunt Edna chimed in nervously, attempting to reroute the conversation down safer terrain. How's that mathematics doctorate coming along? As the attention shifted, I quietly excused myself from the table. I strode swiftly to the corner and snatched up my sketchbook, fleeing to the dark solitude of the back porch. The cold night air bit at my wet cheeks, but I paid it no mind. I sank down on the porch steps, angrily swiping away tears. How dare she? I fumed, hands clenching and unclenching. Who is she to assume she knows my potential? After several shuddering breaths, my rage began to morph into despair. What if Aunt Clara was right? Maybe I would never amount to anything. I gazed forlornly down at my latest sketch, a portrait of Aunt Edna. The intricate details in her kind, wrinkled face had taken me hours to perfect. But what was the point if no one cared? It was worthless, just like me. A warm weight settled around my slumped shoulders, Uncle Max's wool coat. He eased down next to me with a soft groan, eyeglasses glinting in the moonlight. We sat without a word for several moments, my uneven breath sounding loud in the stillness. Finally, Max broke the heavy silence. "Don't listen to her poison, Lila," he urged gently. "She's just threatened by what she can't understand." He tucked a stray lock of hair behind my ear. "But I understand, and I believe your art means something, just like you do." Tears spilled down my face once more, but this time they were tears of gratitude. I slipped quietly out the back door into the crisp night air, carefully closing it behind me before the sounds of the boisterous family gathering could follow me outside. I shrugged my jacket tighter around my shoulders against the chill. Autumn leaves crunched under my shoes as I made my way across the wide back porch and settled onto the wooden steps. Uncle Max and I had taken to meeting here, outside the stuffy, chaotic warmth of my aunt and uncle's home, where the family parties always took place. Here we could talk freely without judgmental ears listening in. Over the last few months since that painful Thanksgiving dinner, Max had become my ally and confidant. The back door creaked open, and I looked up to see Max's tall frame silhouetted in the golden light. He held up the pleated paper bag, clenched in his wrinkled hand, and waved it with a triumphant grin as he eased himself down beside me. "Got them! Had to fight off Martha for the last package." He chuckled in his warm, gravelly tone. He pulled out 2 large sugar cookies, handing me one. I bit into the sweet icing with delight. "Thanks, Uncle Max. You're the best." He smiled, his kind eyes twinkling behind his glasses in the dim glow of the porch light. "I know they're your favorite. I figured you deserved something sweet after all that bitterness earlier." I sighed, smile fading. "She's just never going to accept me, is she?" Max shook his head. "Oh, don't worry about Clara. She's set in her ways, but she's all talk." He gave my shoulder a reassuring pat. "Now tell me what you've been up to." My mood lifted instantly. I applied to the Ridley Art Academy summer program. It's only a few weeks, but they have these amazing classes, and... Max held up a hand, eyes widening in surprise. "Applied? Have you told your parents about this?" I bit my lip, smile disappearing. "No. Mom agrees with Aunt Clara that art is just silly hobby. They'd never take it seriously or support me." Max frowned, leaning back against the porch railing. He seemed to be turning something over in his mind. "Lila," he finally said, "your art, your dreams, they matter. Don't let anyone make you feel otherwise." He paused, brow furrowing in thought. "In fact, I'd like to help, if you'll let me." I stared, confused but intrigued. "Help how?" "Well, clearly, Clara controls the family purse strings, but there are other resources." He reached out and took my hand, giving it an encouraging squeeze. "Let me fund your art academy tuition, anonymously, of course," he added with a conspiratorial wink. "It can be our secret." My eyes widened in disbelief. "What? Uncle Max, that's incredibly generous, but I could never ask you to." He held up a hand. "You're not asking, I'm offering. I believe in you, Lila, and I want to invest in that talent of yours before anyone tries to snuff it out." His words brought tears to my eyes. After years of discouragement, someone was finally taking me and my art seriously. I threw my arms around his neck in an impulsive hug. "Thank you," I choked out through my tears. "I promise I won't waste this opportunity." Max chuckled, patting my back gently. "Of course you won't. I expect a full portfolio of new pieces when you get back." He pulled away, holding me by the shoulders and gazing at me intently. "Just promise me that from now on, you'll start listening to your own voice instead of theirs. Deal?" I took a deep breath and wiped the remaining moisture from my eyes, feeling as if a tremendous weight had been lifted from my soul. Deal? Deal. I crept up the creaky attic steps as stealthily as I could, clutching my latest art supply store purchase. Even with Uncle Max generously funding my artistic pursuits in secret for the past few months, I still felt like a fugitive, sneaking around behind my family's back. But the flush of excitement I felt unboxing shiny new artist pastels made the whole cloak and dagger act worthwhile. I had discovered I loved working with color almost as much as Mom disapproved of my artistic dabbling, as she called it. I smiled to myself, lifting the basement trapdoor slowly. Better to ask her forgiveness later than permission now. Just as the door was about to latch silently behind me, a shrill voice bellowed up from below. "Lila Grace, what in heaven's name are you doing up there?" Aunt Clara's harsh tones echoed off the attic walls, causing me to jump. The pastels tumbled out of my hands, clattering down the steps along with my heart. "Nothing, Aunt Clara," I stammered, scrambling to collect my forbidden treasures strewn across the aging floorboards before she ascended. My efforts were in vain, however, as her heavy footsteps soon thudded behind me. I wheeled around to find Clara glaring down at the vibrant sticks gripped in my hands, eyebrows raised. Wordlessly, she extended her palm. Sheepishly, I handed her the receipt, clutched in my other hand. Squinting through her bifocals, she examined it for several moments while I held my breath. $84.76, she finally exclaimed. "You spent nearly $100 on coloring sticks?" "They're oil pastels," I corrected under my breath. Her sharp eyes snapped to mine. "What was that?" I shrank back against the chill wall. "Nothing. I just used some extra babysitting money, that's all." "Seems like quite a lot of babysitting," she said skeptically. "And just what do you plan to do with these anyway?" Before I could respond, the attic door unexpectedly swung open. We both turned to see Uncle Max mount the last step, slightly out of breath. "There you both are. They're asking for you downstairs, Claire." He addressed my aunt lightly, but his eyes remained steadily locked with mine. Clara glanced between us, lips pursed in suspicion, but she merely let out an impatient huff before tossing the receipt to the floor. "We're not done discussing your little shopping addiction, young lady," she snapped as she brushed past Max. Once her footsteps retreated, I let out the breath I had been holding. "Thank you," I exhaled with relief. Max brushed aside my gratitude with a wave of his hand. "Don't worry about her." Yet behind his casual tone, his brows knitted with concern. I sighed, sadness suddenly deflating my mood as I sunk down onto an old cedar chest. "She's right, though. I can't keep sneaking around like this forever." I lifted my gaze to meet my uncle's kind eyes. "Especially using money you work so hard for. It's too much," I confessed softly. Max crossed the room and crouched down in front of me, gently cupping my chin in his aged hand. "Nonsense. That light I see ignite in you when you create is worth every penny. Don't let Clara make you feel otherwise," he urged. His voice took on an icy edge. "And don't you dare give up." My eyes misted over with emotion. I covered his sturdy hand with my own trembling one. "I won't," I promised in a whisper, "as long as you believe in me." Max smiled then, a smile so warm and full of affection that in that moment I felt I could conquer anything. I paced the threadbare living room carpet, absently winding a lock of hair around my finger. The early morning sun streamed in through the crocheted curtains, glinting off the crystal vase on the coffee table. Usually the colorful wildflowers Aunt Edna lovingly arranged lifted my mood, but today I barely noticed them. "What's got you wearing a groove into my rug so early, child?" I spun to find Edna peering at me curiously from the doorway, already impeccably dressed for the day ahead despite the early hour. I smiled weakly, clearing my throat. "Just thinking about the regional young artist competition," I explained, aiming unsuccessfully for a casual tone. "The application deadline is at the end of the week." Edna nodded knowingly as she settled herself onto the overstuffed sofa. "Clara still refuses to support such nonsense, She made air quotes with her manicured fingers, eliciting a small chuckle from me despite the circumstances. My fleeting laughter quickly faded back into a grimace. "She said if I waste my time entering, I'm also wasting her money. Basically, she's threatening to cut me off if I apply." My shoulders slumped dejectedly at the memory of my aunt's cruel ultimatum from the night before. Before the defeat could fully settle across my face, I felt Edna's graceful hand under my chin, gently tilting my eyes back up to meet her earnest gaze. "Lila, has Clara ever created anything of beauty or value in her entire life?" she asked pointedly. I slowly shook my head, confused but captivated by the sudden fire in her tone. "No. Yet for some bizarre reason, she still believes she is entitled to have authority over yours," Edna continued. Her eyes softened then, brow creasing in motherly concern as she brushed a loose strand of hair behind my ear. "Promise me you won't allow her to dictate your worth, sweetheart," she implored, Don't sacrifice your talent to satisfy that bitter, jealous snake of a woman. She doesn't deserve that power over you. I blinked back, the hot tears suddenly burning behind my eyes. Overcome with emotion, I wrapped my arms around her slender shoulders. "Thank you, Aunt Edna," I whispered into her soft gray hair. In response, she squeezed me tightly, patting my back with her smooth hand. As we finally pulled apart, I caught sight of Uncle Max standing quietly in the doorway behind us. Our eyes met, a silent question hanging between us. "Well, what now?" I took a deep, shaky breath. Hope and fear dueled within me. But seeing the unwavering conviction shining from Max's gaze, I knew I only had one real option. I turned back to Edna with newfound resolve. "You're both right. She doesn't control me. I'm submitting my portfolio, with or without her approval." A slow grin spread across my uncle's wrinkled face. Edna let out a delighted laugh, lightly swatting my knee. "Atta girl!" Max pronounced proudly. He gestured to the unseen painting upstairs that he had secretly financed for my application. "Now, let's make sure they see exactly what they'll be missing out on." Buoyed by their belief in me, I marched from the room with fresh purpose fueling every step. I was through hiding myself and my art away. For the first time, I felt brave enough to stand up for my dreams, no matter the cost. I took a deep, centering breath as I pushed open the tall glass gallery doors. The familiar smells of paint, turpentine, and fresh lacquer washed over me, instantly sparking my creativity. I felt at home here among these floors and walls that showcased artistic vision instead of suppressing it. Unlike my own home, I thought ruefully. I wound through the maze of partition walls displaying the regional Young Artists Contest submissions, searching for my collection. My heels clicked crisply on the polished concrete floors, echoing through the cavernous space. Despite having captured first prize in the competition last month, the thrill of that victory had been short-lived. Oh sure, Edna and Max had celebrated exuberantly on my behalf, toasting my talent with a bottle of contraband champagne, but my parents could barely mutter a half-hearted congratulations through tight lips. Mother refused to even glance at the museum passes and tuition voucher the contest awarded me. And Aunt Clara, she had flown into such a jealous rage when she learned of my win that she stormed off in disgust, vowing to never speak to me again. Her reaction still stung, marring what should have been a shining moment of validation. I rounded a corner, and there suddenly were my paintings, a collection of vivid, abstract cityscapes titled Overlooked Beauty. I traced a gentle finger down the gilded plaque bearing my name, allowing myself a small, satisfied smile. No matter their reaction, this was still an incredible honor at just 18. These pieces represented my true vision, not anyone else's expectations of what art or my future should look like. My smile slipped as footsteps echoed behind me, followed by a grating chuckle that could only belong to one person. I steeled myself as Clara's scowl appeared over my shoulder in the painting's reflective glass. "Well, it's about time you grew up and started painting something worthwhile," she proclaimed with begrudging approval. Her critical eye assessed the building's luminous geometries and brooding alleyways. "At least these I can actually recognize as art, instead of that avant-garde nonsense you usually dirty a canvas with." I clenched my fists behind my back, holding back the acid retort on the tip of my tongue. As I met her baleful gaze in the glass, I realized defending my work was no longer needed. The prize ribbons did that for me now. I simply cleared my throat and gestured to a nearby painting of a crumbling liquor store glowing vibrantly against a stormy sky. "The buildings no one else notices often hold the most beauty inside," I offered mildly. "It's all about perspective." Clara narrowed her eyes, processing the subtle meaning behind my words. Before she could supply a scathing rebuttal, however, Max suddenly materialized beside us. "There you both are. Lila, the gallery director, is looking for you," he interjected smoothly, placing a proprietary hand on my shoulder. "The mayor wants to discuss commissioning a city mural. Shall we?" He guided me away without another glance at Clara's dumbfounded expression. As we walked, I felt lighter and more self-assured than I had in years. The Aunt Claras of the world would always try to hide my shine out of jealousy. But it was getting far harder to dim my inner light these days, especially with Uncle Max so devoted to stoking my creative fire. A waiter crossed in front of me, obscuring my view of the gallery's entrance for a moment. I tracked him impatiently with my eyes as he wove through the well-dressed crowd, offering champagne and hors d'oeuvres on a silver platter. When he finally moved aside, I caught sight of Aunt Clara making yet another dramatic entrance. I grimaced to myself behind my own champagne flute. Trust Clara to be fashionably late to an event celebrating someone else's success. She glided into the gallery in a slinky black dress more suited to a cocktail party than an art show, air-kissing the room as all eyes turned to admire her. I noticed more than a few men's gazes linger a bit too long on her overly accentuated curves as she held court. "Quite an eye-catching woman," Max commented discreetly as he appeared beside me, following my irritated gaze. "She knows it too," I muttered before taking another sip. "But let her preen. Tonight is about my art, not her." Max smiled and clinked his glass gently against mine. "I'll toast to that." Any further conversation was interrupted by the gallery director's amplified voice welcoming the crowd. I thanked her politely as she congratulated me on the turnout and praised my evocative urban scenes. As she moved away to confer briefly with the curator, Clara slinked up in her wake. "Well, congratulations, dear," she purred with mock sincerity, air-kissing my cheek. "Who knew your silly little pastime might actually lead somewhere?" Her patronizing smile didn't reach her eyes. I suppose beauty is subjective after all. I resisted the urge to wipe off her cloying lipstick. "How gracious of you to come, Aunt Clara," I replied evenly instead, "since I know how subjective creative pursuits can be for you." Clara's painted smile faded slightly. Before she could supply what was surely a scorching retort, the director returned to the microphone, bringing the chatter to a close. "Again, we are so pleased to showcase this promising young talent's unique perspective," she said, gesturing toward me. "It's clear Lila has a fresh, meaningful artistic vision, one that her Uncle Max should be very proud of cultivating." Murmurs of appreciation echoed from the audience along with a smattering of applause. Clara's head swiveled sharply between me and Max. Under the weight of her glare, understanding visibly dawned across her primped features, followed swiftly by outrage. But before she could cause a scene, I stepped forward, holding up a gracious hand to acknowledge the accolades. "Actually, my Aunt Clara deserves quite a lot of credit for the inspiration behind this collection," I interjected smoothly into the microphone. "In fact, the title, Overlooked Beauty, is an homage to her unique perspective on my creative potential over the years." I turned to lock eyes with Clara, whose face had turned nearly purple. But true vision lies in those willing to look closer and nurture unseen gifts, not suppress them, regardless of popular opinion. I smiled benignly. "Don't you agree, Aunt Clara?" Her mouth opened and closed like a gasping fish under the weight of too many eyes and the hidden accusation in my words. For once it seemed Clara had no clever retort or searing glance to offer in return. I smiled wider. "I thought so. Cheers to fresh vision." "Then," I declared brightly, raising my glass. The crowd, oblivious to our true conversational undercurrents, echoed my toast eagerly, much to Aunt Clara's dismay. I stepped back to scrutinize my latest mural sketch, pencil smudges staining my hands. The city council had commissioned a stylized landscape to adorn the community center's remodeled facade. I wanted it to capture the neighborhood's vitality and cultural roots. As I reached for a rag to wipe the charcoal from my fingers, my phone vibrated loudly against the work table. I smiled involuntarily when I saw Uncle Max's face flash on the cracked screen. "Working hard as always," he exclaimed when I answered. His warm approval still caused a glow of pride to swell in my chest. "Just trying to do justice to the Irvington district," I replied, holding up my drawing to the light. "But it's getting there." "Well, make sure to take a break soon to eat," Max gently scolded. "We need to keep that brilliant artistic mind of yours fed, after all." I laughed. "I will, and thank you, Uncle Max." "You can thank me by letting me take you out tonight to celebrate properly," he insisted. "The whole family is getting together at Ambrosia, and I want to toast my world-famous niece." My smile faltered slightly. World-famous might be stretching it a bit, and honestly, I'd rather skip another tense family dinner if it's all the same to you. An uncomfortable silence stretched between us. I instantly regretted declining his sweet offer, but the idea of facing Aunt Clara and her scorn even now, months later, still made my stomach turn. The wounds from her resentment ran deep. Max cleared his throat gently. Well, I understand if you're still feeling raw, but for what it's worth, Clara has been trying to make amends lately. I snorted in disbelief. Clara doesn't do amends. I'm serious, Max insisted. She knows she behaved wretchedly. Don't you think she at least deserves a chance for old time's sake? I bit my lip, considering. The genuine entreaty in his voice gave me pause. And he had a point. Holding grudges had never been in my nature. I sighed deeply. Okay, I'll be the bigger person, but I'm not promising anything more than basic civility. Max chuckled, clearly pleased. That's all I ask. I'll swing by at 7 to get you. See you soon. I set down the phone with a reluctant smile. One tense dinner couldn't derail my newfound creative joy and confidence, and if Aunt Clara was genuinely ready to bury the hatchet, then maybe, just maybe, it was time I did too. After changing into a smart blouse and slacks, I gave my hair a final fluff in the hall mirror right as the doorbell rang. I took a deep breath, sent up a quick prayer for patience, and went to greet my uncle. To my surprise, however, Aunt Clara's perfectly made-up face peered nervously at me instead when I opened the door. Oh, good, you're home, she exhaled, clearly relieved. She smoothed her hands down her simple black sheath. I was hoping we could talk privately before dinner. I stared wordlessly as a contrite Clara glanced at her heels. May I come in? Really, Lila, still playing the martyr? Or just waiting to cash in on sympathy? Derek's mocking tone cut through the bustle of the crowded cafe, turning heads at nearby tables. I took a slow, steadying breath, willing my hands not to tremble as I set down my coffee cup. After walking out 5 years ago, leaving me struggling alone with 2 teenagers, Derek waltzed back into my life as though no time had passed. Seeing him smiling smugly, I wanted to scream, to throw my scalding coffee in his face. Instead, I met his gaze and gave a thin smile. Still as charming as ever, I see. Ava and Ethan weren't here to restrain me this time. My daughter would have placed a gentle hand on my arm, while my son glared daggers at his father. I couldn't afford to make a scene. The owner knew me as a regular, not an unstable drama queen. Come on, Lila, no need to be so hostile. Derek slid into the seat across from me, oblivious to my tension. I just wanted to see how you're getting on. It can't have been easy, raising 2 kids alone, but you always did love playing the victim. The audacity boiled my blood. I pictured my long nights working freelance design jobs, trying desperately to keep the power on as Derek traveled the world with his young girlfriend, but I wouldn't give him the satisfaction of seeing my struggle. Oh, finding work was tricky at first. I waved a hand breezily. But you know me, I managed all right. Managed, please. We both know you were left cash-strapped from the divorce. Derek raised an eyebrow. But I suppose the kids helped you scrape by. The barb stung. Derek knew firsthand the sacrifices Ava and Ethan had made, giving up their college funds so we wouldn't lose the house. He just didn't care. I ground my teeth, holding back a retort. Derek eyed me curiously. You're looking almost well-rested. Found someone to bankroll you these days? I let out a short, sharp laugh. If only he knew. Last week, I discovered my late mother-in-law had left half her estate to me in her will. She knew her son had abandoned his family. Her last act was ensuring I had the means to rebuild. Irony truly was delicious. Oh, just a few freelance jobs here and there, I shrugged, letting Derek interpret things however he wished. His eyes narrowed, clearly unhappy with my vague response. I felt a spark of satisfaction. After everything he'd put me through, keeping him guessing was the least I could do. Where was that slimy new girlfriend of his anyway? You can drop the act, Lila, Derek snapped. We both know you don't have 2 nickels to rub together. I raised an eyebrow. Careful with those assumptions. Things change. Derek stared at me, frustration etched on his face. I let the silence hang between us. Finally, he leaned back, an oily smile on his face. Well, I'm glad one of us managed to turn things around after, everything. He made a vague gesture with his hand, as if our split had been some impersonal corporate downsizing and not his conscious choice to walk out. Anyway, I should get going. Maybe we can all catch up sometime soon? Sure, Derek. I kept my tone neutral. We'll be in touch. As he walked out the door, I allowed myself a triumphant smile. Derek could keep guessing about my little windfall, at least for now. I had plans for that money. Plans I'd been crafting since the day he left me standing numbly in the rubble of our old life. The time had come for Derek to learn exactly what I was capable of. I could still picture the lawyer's stunned face when I walked into his plush office last week. "Mrs. West, please have a seat." I perched on the edge of the leather chair, clutching my purse. After Derek left, I'd gotten used to waiting in dingy government offices, hoping for assistance. This place felt different. The lawyer fiddled with a file on his polished desk before meeting my eyes. "I apologize for the surprise visit, Mrs. West. I'm sure you're wondering why I asked you here today." I nodded mutely. "Well, I handled the estate of Derek's late mother, Betty West, and she left specific instructions that you were to be informed once the estate was settled." Shock rooted me in place. Derek's mother and I had always been close, despite her son's flaws. She'd even subtly supported me leaving Derek in the end. Not that I could afford a divorce lawyer on my tiny income, but I never imagined. Instructions regarding what, exactly? My voice sounded hoarse to my ears. "Mrs. West left you a sizable portion of her estate, Mrs. Lila, half to be precise." The room spun. Derek's mother had virtually cut out her only son, instead providing for me and her abandoned grandchildren. Tears burned in my eyes. After everything she'd witnessed of Derek's behavior, she passed her final judgment through this gesture. "This is unbelievable," I whispered. "It must be some mistake." "No mistake," the lawyer assured me. He slid a paper across the slick desk. As I scanned the legal document, disbelief gave way to a fiery satisfaction. With these funds, I could provide my children the stable home Derek had yanked away. More importantly, Betty had unknowingly armed me with the means to finally teach my selfish ex a lesson. I raised my eyes to the lawyer's expectant face. "Please convey my deepest thanks to Mrs. West. I don't know how to repay this gesture." He nodded. "Your resilience and strength of character is repayment enough, Mrs. West. Betty always said you held the family together." I managed a shaky smile, the beginnings of a plan already churning in my mind. Derek had no clue what was coming for him. Now, nearly a week later, I still grin thinking of Derek's pompous swagger. He has no idea the ammunition his own mother provided against him from beyond the grave. Pulling into the driveway, I spot Ava trailing slowly behind her brother towards the house. Weighed down by their overflowing backpacks, I hurry over to help lighten their load. "Rough first week?" "The usual," mutters Ethan, averting his eyes. I don't press him for details. The move to a new school had already been hard enough without his father's sudden reappearance. Ava offers me a wan smile. "I'm all right, Mom. Class is going fine so far." My brave, empathetic girl. I pull her into a quick hug before urging them towards the house. No need to delay sharing my news. Their stunned faces and exclamations of disbelief draw the first carefree laughter from me in ages. Soon, I vow silently, soon we'll give your father exactly what he deserves. "Mom, is all this really necessary?" Ethan's brows knit together as I lay out brochures on the dining table. "Completely necessary," I confirm, lining them up neatly. "You both deserve a chance to pursue your dreams. Now we can actually afford that chance." Ava traces her finger down glossy pamphlets showcasing art schools and design programs. A faraway look crosses her face, one I recognize from the early days with her father, before practicalities like cost came crushing in. "We know you and Dad struggled to save anything for college," she says softly. "You sure you want to spend this money on us?" I gently grasp her hand. "Ava, sweetie, you and your brother will always be my first priority. My only regret is not having enough to provide this sooner." Before they can argue, I stand briskly. Now, time for phase 2. I can feel their curious stares on my back as I boot up the old laptop. We'd made do with sluggish devices and spotty internet since the divorce, but the website I pull up now looks sharp and professional. Lila Gray Designs. Understated, refined. Subtly upscale. "What's all this, Mom?" Ethan leans over my shoulder. "Just a little business I'm starting." I add breezily, "Freelance work takes me so far, but with an influx of capital." I let the implication hang with a knowing look. Ethan whistles under his breath. "Damn, Graham's really set you up well." The distinct sound of a new notification grabs our attention. Ah, there we are. I turn the screen to show an appointment confirmation from a wealthy client in the next town over. Mrs. Vanderhorn here wants to fully redecorate her home, and Lila Gray Designs fits her aesthetic perfectly. Their delighted laughter draws my first genuine grin in ages. Let Derek get wind of my little venture, and the lies I carefully crafted to shield it. His ego won't tolerate being left out of the loop for long. Like clockwork, Derek shows up the following Saturday while the kids are out, casually mentioning spotting my stylish new business featured in an online advertisement. Oh, just a little side project. I wave him off breezily. Helps bring in some pocket money for extras. His poorly veiled curiosity brings a vindictive spark of satisfaction. I must say, Lila, I'm impressed. Turning things around so quickly, not exactly what I expected from you. The thinly veiled barb slides off as I offer an unaffected shrug. What can I say? I discovered some new motivation. Let him make of that what he will. Derek lingers awkwardly on the doorstep before clearing his throat. Well, I'll let you get back to it, but, let me know if you or the kids need anything. Trailing off, he heads back to his flashy car, envy evident in every step. I gently close the door, triumph surging in my chest. My solicitous ex would likely be turning up more frequently now, trying to ascertain exactly where my new income stems from. Little does he know the means of his downfall have already been set in motion. Soon, my well-crafted trap will snap shut around him, and Derek will finally understand exactly what I'm capable of when backed into a corner. The playing field between us is about to be leveled permanently. I knew it was only a matter of time before Derek showed up again. Still, hearing the unexpected knock at my front door makes my pulse spike with anger. I wipe damp hands on a dish towel before striding over. Derek's smiling face fills the doorway, his gaze already wandering past me to scope out any changes. Lila, good to see you again. His too bright tone sets my teeth on edge. Just thought I'd check in, see how you and the kids are settling into your new routine. I block his view with my body. Oh, we're all doing great, staying busy, you know. Yeah, I'll bet. Derek attempts to peer over my shoulder. This house looks more polished than I remember. Business must be booming these days. I fold my arms across my chest. Did you want something, Derek? His smile slips slightly at my cool tone. Good. The less at home he feels here, the better. Come on, Lila, no need to be rude. I know the divorce was hard, but we were married a long time. He adopts a reasonable tone. Don't you think it's in the kids' best interest if we get along? The audacity sends hot rage spiraling through me. This pompous jerk didn't give a damn about his children's well-being when he abandoned us. Now he wants to play caring father to worm his way back into our lives? Over my dead body. I inhale slowly. I'm sure the kids appreciate your concern, but we've adjusted well. Anything else? Derek shoves his hands in his pockets, glancing longingly past me. You, never mentioned where this extra income came from. New boyfriend I should know about? There it is. I suppress a sharp smile. You forfeited the right to details about my personal life years ago. My business is just that, mine. Frustration flashes across Derek's face at my evasion. Too bad, he'll have to work a lot harder if he wants back inside, and I intend to slam the door on him when he least expects it. Right, well, I'm happy things are going well for you all. The forced smile is back. Will I see you and the kids at my mother's memorial service next month? We should all catch up properly there. I nod briskly. Oh yes, we'll be catching up, and airing every miserable secret Derek hoped to keep buried. My mind is already churning with ideas when I firmly shut the door on his retreating back. The time has nearly come to pull the trigger on my plan. After years of anguish, Derek will finally face the karmic retribution he deserves. I scan the solemn faces gathered in the church reception hall after Betty West's memorial service, searching for my children. Groups of Derek's family and friends murmur in clusters, casting the occasional curious glance my way. I spot Ava and Ethan speaking quietly near a memorial wreath decorated with Betty's picture. As I approach, Ethan shoots a glare across the room. I follow his gaze to find Derek holding court with his brothers, accepting condolences with a somber expression. Rage simmers in my gut at his callous performance. Derek couldn't be bothered to visit his ailing mother more than once or twice a year. But now he milks the grieving son routine for all it's worth. I plan to let Derek slowly self-destruct, his boundless ego never realizing my orchestrations. But this farce is the last straw. Squaring my shoulders, I cross the room to confront the ring of West brothers. Their conversation cuts off abruptly at my presence. Lila. Derek breaks the sudden silence with a cordial nod. Thanks for coming today and for bringing the kids. I ignore his empty pleasantries, fixing him with an icy stare. I think your brothers should hear exactly why their mother revised her final wishes. Don't you, Derek? He pales slightly, eyes darting around. I'm not sure I know what you mean. Oh, I think you do. My sharp tone silences the muttered questions surrounding us. I have the rapt focus of every West family member now. Perfect. You see, Betty left a sizable portion of her estate directly to me, not her only son. I keep my gaze locked on Derek's rapidly reddening face. She knew exactly the kind of man you turned out to be, how you abandoned your family without a second thought or a scent of support. I relentlessly continue over murmured exclamations from his relatives. You couldn't be bothered to lift a finger when emergency bills piled up or college funds disappeared overnight. You left 2 teenagers fatherless without once looking back. Years of pain and rage keep my tone lethal and steady. Your mother saw it all happen under her own roof. Her final act was ensuring your children were provided for without their father's help. My words land like physical blows. Derek's mouth hangs stupidly as he grasps for a response. For over 5 years I dreamed of finally wiping that entitled look off his face. I lean in to deliver the final twist of the knife. You'll be proud to know her money is already providing a bright future for your children, one you didn't see fit to give them yourself. A deafening silence engulfs us as I finish speaking. The truth Betty recognized too late in her son now dawns on every West relation. Red-faced, Derek turns and stalks toward the exit under the weight of their shocked judgment. I came here intending to orchestrate Derek's downfall myself. Instead, Betty ensured he already dug his own grave. Now I'm simply kicking the dirt over him, and I don't plan on stopping anytime soon. I knew it was only a matter of time before Derek's wounded pride drove him to retaliate. Still, opening my mailbox to find a legal notice summoning me to court makes my hands tremble in anger. Skimming through arrogant legal jargon, the gist becomes stomach-turningly clear. Derek aims to contest his mother's will and claim a portion of my inheritance for himself. Alleging, too, that I turned his family against him at the memorial through deception and lies. Red clouds my vision. The last vestiges of self-control shred away, and I storm inside to call the only lawyer I can afford. Her office may be tiny and cramped, but I pray she possesses the grit needed to face Derek's relentless attorneys. He doesn't have a legal leg to stand on, Mrs. West, she asserts during our first strategy session. Judges frown upon these kinds of greedy claims, especially against bereaved spouses and children. I nod, clinging to this lifeline. The inheritance represents my only means of keeping Derek firmly out of our lives. I cannot risk surrendering even a portion of it now. Not when my children are still so vulnerable. As I helplessly watch the court date approach, my outrage toward Derek swells to consuming proportions. The settlement was never about the money itself for me, but the security it offered my family. Security Derek hadn't bothered providing when he had the chance. Now he endeavors to steal even that shred of stability away, like some caricature of a deadbeat dad from a cheap drama. Well, it's time his loved ones recognize Derek for the monster he truly is behind the flashy surface. If I can ensure everyone's eyes are opened in that courtroom, then maybe, finally, he'll slink away for good this time. My chance for closure arrives on a brisk November morning. I dress with meticulous precision. Derek may have the high-priced lawyers today, but appearances still count when reputations are at stake. The hearing itself proceeds agonizingly slow, each minute crawling past as Derek's attorney argues greedy platitudes. I cling white-knuckled to my chair, twitching at every embellished reference to my client's grief at his mother's tragic early passing. Finally, the judge calls me as a witness to illuminate Betty West's intentions in her will revisions. I recount my close bond with the West matriarch in concise, dispassionate detail before concluding, Your Honor, the only desire motivating this petition is my ex-husband's resentment and pride at being cut off by his own mother. I turned slightly to meet Derek's reddening face. Mrs. West acted decisively to provide for her son's family after witnessing years of callous neglect firsthand. I urge you to recognize her judgment by upholding her wishes. My words reverberate through the suddenly silent room. Out of the corner of my eye, I spot Derek's brothers shifting uncomfortably as the ugly truth repeats back at them. Let Derek try worming into their good graces again after today. When the gavel finally drops, dismissing his claim, the sound echoes with sweet finality. I float from the courtroom, sea-scathed but triumphant, Derek's howls of outrage music to my ears. My counterattack succeeded even beyond my hopes. Now to press the advantage while Derek regroups and secure my family's independence for good. The courtroom doors had barely closed behind me when my phone began buzzing incessantly with calls. Derek's brothers and cousins all suddenly wanted the real story on their family rift straight from the source. I blocked every last one of them with vicious satisfaction. Let Derek try convincing his relatives of his virtue now, after I aired his dirty laundry so publicly. Even his polished lawyer persona can't erase the image of deadbeat dad I painted. In the wake of the hearing, blissful silence descended from Derek's direction, but I knew better than to believe I'd seen the last of him yet. A narcissist like Derek couldn't tolerate being so humiliated, even by his own mother. Sure enough, just days later, my cell phone lit up with his number. I tapped ignore with a smirk. Derek leaving pleading voicemails was a sweet bonus, but I had a far more interesting call to take. My lawyer wore a delighted grin when I answered. "Well, Mrs. West, acquiring that financial affidavit on your ex paid off nicely. I just spoke with my contacts, and it seems Derek's assets are mostly tied up in flashy new cars in his luxury apartment. But with that new girlfriend of his being a kept woman, his monthly balances are razor thin." I pictured Derek spinning lies to preserve his wealthy image while desperately financing his lavish lifestyle on credit. It lined up perfectly with his greed for my inheritance. Nothing stroked that fragile ego like other people's money. Well, no more. I couldn't wipe the savage grin from my face as I thanked my lawyer profusely. When I hung up, another notification flashed insistently. A bank transfer into my account for a significant sum. My breath caught as I scanned the description. Anonymous donation earmarked for a local charity supporting single-parent families left destitute by divorce. It seemed one of Derek's brothers decided to preemptively smooth relations after that disastrous court hearing, and the sizable amount now presented the perfect avenue for cementing Derek's downfall. I arrived early on donation day, ensuring I snagged a position right up front as the news cameras started rolling. As the charity representatives stepped up to the microphone for brief remarks, I tuned out their speech, fixing my gaze on the text flying between local reporters in front of me. News really did travel fast in our small town. Right on cue, the director wrapped up her comments by accepting an anonymous $50,000 donation in honor of Derek West's inspiring philanthropy. I relished the comical double-take from the reporters as camera shutters started clicking wildly. Derek's name was about to grace every small-town newspaper and website, indelibly tied to abandoning needy families. I maintained a humble, emotional expression as congratulations poured in, emphasizing my selfless desire to support other struggling single parents. But internally, I was crowing at the comprehensive obliteration of Derek's social standing I just engineered. Let's see how that leggy new girlfriend of his handles becoming involved with such a notorious deadbeat dad. Or how many of Derek's old country club peers will still return his calls once this all circulates. Checkmate. No doubt Derek will keep fighting to save his precious image. But the beauty of social media information is it can never be entirely erased. Every past business connection will have this scandal lurking in the back of their minds now, thanks to me. Karmic retribution indeed, and I'm just getting started. In the weeks following the charity stunt, I waited with bated breath for Derek's reaction, anticipating rage. But as days slipped past with no expensive cars roaring up or shrill calls harassment, an unsettling question took root. Could Derek finally be giving up? The lack of retaliation was somehow anticlimactic after years envisioning this downfall. I knew I secured total social and family exile for Derek. His girlfriend likely dumped him after that mortifying deadbeat daddy designation went public. By all measures, I triumphed. So why this lingering restlessness in my gut? No doubt Derek was off unsuccessfully pleading his case to old money connections who now avoided his calls. Time to refocus on what truly matters, my children, finally thriving free of their father's toxicity. As I review acceptances rolling in daily from prestigious art and journalism programs, I allow myself a small satisfied smile. Betty would be so proud seeing these opportunities her sacrifice created for her grandkids, and I vow to cherish our newfound security and leave thoughts of Derek's future troubles behind me. Until late one Friday afternoon when an unexpected visitor showed up looking properly chastised. I opened the front door to find Derek shifting awkwardly on the step, unable to meet my gaze. Up close, the changes in him stood out. Rumpled clothes, slumped shoulders, hair peppered with more gray than I remembered, he looked like a disgraced CEO after a messy board ouster. I folded my arms, waiting. After a long pause, Derek cleared his throat, eyes on his shoes. Guess I deserve the cold welcome. You have every right to slam the door in my face. He finally raised his head, remorse creasing his face. What I did, the court case, the threats, all of it. I don't have any defense. Just wanted to tell you I'm sorry, Lila. Truly sorry. Now it was my turn to avoid eye contact as I processed the sincerity in Derek's broken tone. A year ago, I would have given anything to wring this apology from my smug ex-husband. Hearing it now just drudged up the whisper of doubt. Had I gone overboard orchestrating such utter destruction? I shook off that thought with effort. I appreciate you saying that, Derek, but words don't erase the years of pain. My voice remained gentle but firm. I've worked hard to build a stable life here. Derek closed his eyes as though steeling himself before responding quietly. You have every right to hate me. I won't bother you again once I sign the divorce papers. My head jerked up as he shoved a document through the door. There on the top line, Derek signed away his legal right to meager spousal support, should my design business someday take off. I stared searchingly at this version of Derek I never knew, a defeated, regretful man ready to let go of his spite and pride. I wordlessly stepped back, allowing Derek space to shuffle inside and close the door. Maybe there was a shred of hope for civility between us yet. It was just another quiet evening at home until the phone call came and turned our world upside down. Marcus and I were sitting at the dinner table, enjoying the salmon and roasted potatoes I'd made, when his cell phone started buzzing. He glanced at the screen and froze. Who is it? I asked. It's Selena, he said grimly. Selena, his 19-year-old daughter from his disastrous first marriage who he hadn't spoken to in years. My heart sank. Nothing good could come of this. Marcus answered the call and I studied his face as he listened, his eyes narrowing in concern. After a few terse words, he hung up and let out a long sigh. What did she want? I asked, bracing myself. She's coming to live with us. Her roommate kicked her out, so she's driving here tomorrow. I dropped my fork, my appetite vanishing. Here? For how long? She didn't say, but it sounded like she plans to stay indefinitely. I felt the panic rising in my chest. We'd worked so hard to build a good life, a stable home. Marcus and I both came from broken families, rife with lies and betrayals. It had taken years of therapy and trust building to heal those wounds. The last thing we needed was a destructive, entitled 19-year-old tearing open those scars again. Can't her mother take her in? I asked. Marcus shook his head. You know how that went. The divorce was nuclear. They haven't spoken since. Before I could object further, we heard the front door open. Our 16-year-old son Eli walked in, home from basketball practice. He joined us at the table, his wavy brown hair damp with sweat. Hey, Mom, Dad, what's going on? He asked, detecting the tension immediately. He was an exceptionally perceptive kid. Marcus gave him a tired smile. We just got a call from your sister Selena. She's going to be staying with us for a while. Eli's eyes widened in surprise. He knew little about Selena, other than the few bitter stories Marcus had told over the years. Okay, Eli said slowly. How long is she staying? We don't know yet, Marcus admitted. An uneasy silence settled on the room. I could imagine the worried thoughts spinning through Eli's mind. Selena's sudden arrival would disrupt the stability he valued so deeply, but he was too kind-hearted to voice those concerns. I reached over and gave his hand a reassuring squeeze. Then I turned to Marcus, my eyes flashing with determination. We need to set firm ground rules, I said. No freeloading or taking advantage. If she wants to stay here, she needs to get a job and contribute. Marcus nodded. You're right. I'll make that clear when she arrives. But as we cleaned up the remains of dinner, I couldn't shake the feeling that nothing good would come from Selina's return. The past has a way of catching up, even if you barricade the door. The next morning I woke up feeling uneasy. Today was the day Selina would arrive. Marcus had cleared out the small guest room for her, but I doubted she'd be happy with the cramped space. Over breakfast, Marcus tried reassuring Eli. "Don't worry, I'm sure Selina has grown up a lot since I last saw her. Just try to make her feel welcome." Eli nodded, but I could tell he was dreading her arrival as much as I was. Around noon, we heard a car pull up outside. "That must be her," Marcus said. My heart pounded as we went to the front door. A blonde girl stepped out of a beat-up hatchback jammed with clothes and boxes. She looked nothing like the sullen, scrawny 13-year-old I remembered from the divorce hearings years ago. She'd grown tall and pretty, wearing stylish clothes and expertly applied makeup. But her bright smile didn't reach her eyes. Marcus hugged her awkwardly. "Welcome home, Selina." "Thanks, Daddy," she said sweetly, though she'd made no effort to contact him since the divorce. "It's so good to see you again." Over the next hour, Selina carried in her boxes and bags, piling them in the small guest room despite the lack of space. She rejected Marcus's offers to help, barking at him not to touch her things. So much for her growing up, I thought. At dinner, Selina dominated the conversation, chatting about herself and sprinkling in subtle insults toward me. "I can't believe you're still working as a nurse, Lena. Wouldn't you rather do something more interesting?" I bit my tongue. Nursing was my passion, but Selina clearly looked down on it. When Eli talked about applying for college scholarships, Selina laughed sharply. "Good luck getting enough money to attend a decent school." Eli's face burned. I knew how hard he'd worked for those scholarships, maintaining straight A's while excelling at sports. After dinner, I pulled Marcus aside. "We need to set ground rules for Selina," I urged. "No more of this entitled behavior." He sighed. "You're right, I'll talk to her." But over the next few days, nothing changed. Selina continued acting rudely, while doing nothing to get a job or help around the house. My patience wore dangerously thin. Then came the final straw. I arrived home from work one evening to find Selina gone and Eli sitting alone, his face pale. "What's wrong?" I asked. "She stole my laptop, and my money jar was empty." His lower lip trembled. "There was over $500 in there from my job." Rage boiled inside me. That money represented years of Eli's hard work and sacrifice. When Selina finally swanned in, I confronted her. "Give back Eli's money and his laptop now." She smirked. "Or what? You'll kick me out." I wanted to slap that smug look off her face. But violence wouldn't solve anything. Selina was toxic, destroying all she touched. I had to protect my family from her, even if it meant driving away Marcus's daughter for good. I decided right then and there. Selina had to go. Her toxic behavior was destroying our family, and I refused to let that continue. When Marcus came home, I told him what Selina had done. She stole from her own brother after we opened our home to her. "I want her out, Marcus. Today." He looked pained. "I know Selina's behavior is unacceptable, but she's still my daughter. If we kick her out now, she'll have nowhere to go." "So we just let her keep stealing from us?" I cried. "She's manipulating you. Can't you see that?" "Give me a little more time to work things out with her," Marcus pleaded. "With some boundaries, I think Selina can change." I shook my head in frustration. Marcus's parental guilt was blinding him to Selina's true nature. But I had to pick my battles carefully to avoid damaging my marriage. "1 week," I said. "If her behavior doesn't improve drastically in 1 week, she has to leave." Marcus agreed reluctantly. I only hoped we could limit the damage Selina inflicted before then. But over the next few days, things only got worse. Selina stayed out partying all night, then slept past noon. She helped herself to my jewelry, claimed they were just loans. When I demanded she get a job, she scoffed. "Why work when Daddy lets me stay here for free?" One night, I came home to find her smoking on the couch. When I yelled at her to take it outside, she blew smoke in my face. "You're not my mother. Don't tell me what to do." I felt sick, realizing the extent of Selina's manipulation. She knew exactly how to provoke me while acting sweetly innocent around Marcus. The final straw came when I received a call from my credit card company, asking about a suspicious purchase. Over $2,000 at a luxury clothing store in LA. It didn't take a genius to realize Selina had stolen my card. She'd racked up more debt in a week than Eli and I spent on food in a month. When Marcus came home, I confronted him, shaking with rage. "Your daughter is destroying us. I want her out of this house tonight." Marcus's face was haggard. "You're right. I wanted to believe Selena could change, but clearly she's out of control." "It's me or her, Marcus," I said quietly. "Choose carefully." He pulled me into a hug. "You and Eli will always come first. I just pray we can get through this without tearing our family apart." We sat down with Selena, and Marcus told her she had to move out immediately. She flew into a rage, hurling insults and accusations. I stayed silent, letting Marcus handle his deranged daughter. When Selena stomped off to pack her things, Marcus put his head in his hands. "I'm so sorry I brought this madness into our home," he said. "You and Eli mean everything to me. However long it takes, I promise we'll recover from Selena's poison." I squeezed his hand, drawing strength from his words. With unity, we would survive this trial. Selena's twisted schemes could not break our family. The weeks after kicking out Selena were tense. Marcus tried calling her several times, but she refused to speak with him. I knew he was torn up with guilt, blaming himself for how she'd turned out. I tried reassuring him we'd done the right thing. Selena was like a tornado, destroying all in her path. We changed the locks and canceled my stolen credit card. The bank's fraud department was understanding, agreeing to waive the bogus charges. Slowly, our lives regained a sense of normalcy. Then the letter came, shattering that fragile peace all over again. It was from a bank I'd never heard of, thanking me for opening a new credit account. My breath caught in my throat as I read the attached paperwork. Someone had applied for a personal loan in my name, forging my signature on the forms. $15,000 already deposited into an unknown account. My hands shook with anger and panic. That amount of debt could devastate our family, and there was only one person who would stoop so low. When Marcus came home, I thrust the letter at him. "Your daughter is trying to destroy us. We need to call the police." His eyes widened in shock as he read the letter. "My God, I know Selena has issues, but outright identity theft?" He slumped at the table, head in his hands. "This is all my fault. I failed her as a father." My anger thawed slightly. As much as Selena infuriated me, I knew this betrayal devastated Marcus even more. I sat down beside him. "You did your best with her under terrible circumstances. Some people just refuse to change. But now we need to focus on protecting ourselves and Eli. Will you call the police to report the fraud?" Marcus sighed heavily, but nodded. "You're right. I need to do the responsible thing, no matter how painful." We spent an agonizing hour on the phone with the police and bank, filing reports about Selena's crime. It still boggled my mind that the smiling little girl I remembered from Marcus's wedding photos could grow into this heartless criminal. The bank investigator informed us the loan had been taken out locally, meaning Selena was still lurking nearby. The thought made my skin crawl. That night, as we lay in bed, I turned to Marcus. "We'll get that loan invalidated. The bank believes we're the victims here." "I hope you're right," he said, "because if not, this could financially devastate us. We could even lose the house." The unspoken fear hung heavy between us. Selena wasn't content just poisoning her father's memory of her. She aimed to completely destroy his new family, no matter the cost. As I finally drifted off to sleep, I repeated a silent mantra. Selena's scheming couldn't touch us, no matter how hard she tried. Goodness and truth would prevail. But in my heart, I harbored a cold anger I'd never felt before. If Selena continued threatening my loved ones, I would stop at nothing to take her down. Over the next few weeks, we heard nothing from Selena. The bank was investigating the fraudulent loan, buying us time before the debts came due. The police had tried visiting Selena's last known address, but she'd already vacated her apartment, leaving no trace. Marcus spent hours scouring online records, trying to find where Selena had disappeared to, but it seemed she knew how to avoid being caught, a true con artist. Then on a sunny Saturday, everything changed again. Marcus was at a weekend teaching conference, so Eli and I decided to see a movie together. But when we returned home, I instantly sensed something was wrong. The front door was ajar. My pulse pounded as I rushed inside, Eli close behind. "Wait in the hall," I told him. If Selena was lurking inside, I didn't want Eli getting hurt. I crept forward, peering into the darkened rooms. At first, nothing seemed disturbed. Then I reached Eli's bedroom. The entire room had been ransacked. Dresser drawers flung open, mattress upended, closet ransacked. Eli rushed in behind me, crying out in shock. That's when I saw the paper on his bed, scrawled with a taunting message, "College fund gone. Oops, better start bussing tables, loser brother." Red spots swam before my eyes. The college fund Marcus and I had painstakingly built for Eli, untouched until now, nearly $20,000 for his future, was gone. Stolen by Selena to fund her extravagant tastes, while she left crude insults for the brother she'd never bothered to know. I heard a strangled sob behind me. Eli's face was white, eyes glittering with tears. "All that money you saved for me, gone." I wrapped my arms around my kind, diligent son, so undeserving of this cruelty. "We'll figure this out," I promised. But inside, my blood boiled. That money was meant to give Eli a chance at a better life. And Selena had snatched that dream away without a second thought. When Marcus arrived, he broke down at the violation of our home and Eli's loss. I rarely saw my soft-spoken husband enraged, but today his fury mirrored my own. Our savings drained, our locks picked, our son senselessly tormented. Enough was enough. Selena had to face consequences before she destroyed more innocent lives. The next evening, ignoring Marcus's warnings, I drove to the rundown motel where Selena was rumored to be staying. Sure enough, I spotted her beat-up hatchback out front. I banged on her door until she finally opened it, smirking when she saw me. "Well, if it isn't St. Lena, come to preach about morality?" I slapped her across the face. "You absolute monster," I spat. "Wasn't ruining our lives once enough for you?" Selena's grin vanished. "You'll regret that, Butch," she hissed, lunging toward me. We scuffled briefly before I shoved her back inside, slamming the door in her contorted face. I strode away, trembling but resolute. One way or another, Selena's reign of terror ended today. I had given her every chance to change. But some people rotted from the inside out, beyond hope of redemption. Dragging them from the darkness risked them pulling you down into their depths. Selena had proven herself a soulless parasite, incapable of goodness. Now it was time to excise her from our lives for good, before her fangs struck again. In the weeks after my confrontation with Selena, I waited on edge for her retaliation. Marcus increased security around our home. I pulled Eli from school, not wanting him alone until Selena was apprehended. But as days passed with no sign of her, we began to breathe easier. Maybe she had realized her crimes would catch up with her if she stayed in town. Then, late one night, I awoke to blaring fire alarms. Marcus and I rushed to Eli's room and found it filled with smoke, flames licking up one wall. We grabbed Eli and raced outside, moments before the fire engulfed his bedroom. As firefighters extinguished the blaze, suspicion gnawed at me. This was no electrical mishap. Selena had made her final, desperate play for revenge. The police investigation confirmed my fears. Traces of gasoline had been splashed along one side of the house and ignited. A disturbing amount, enough to incinerate us as we slept if the timing had been slightly off. Marcus's face was haggard as he spoke to the investigators. "My daughter Selena Rogers is your arson suspect. We have evidence she committed identity theft and burglary against us. This fire was her latest attempt to harm my family." With the troubling revelations about Selena's escalating crimes, the police finally took serious action. They obtained security footage from nearby cameras, showing a figure in Selena's car fleeing the neighborhood right before firefighters arrived. Arrest warrants were issued. Selena's name and photo were distributed to local media, labeling her an armed and dangerous fugitive. Marcus even made a direct plea for Selena to turn herself in, promising she'd still receive due process. But Selena remained in hiding, our lives frozen in limbo as we waited for the snake to strike again. I stayed locked indoors with Eli, rifles and fire extinguishers within reach. She'd taken so much from us already. I refused to let her steal our sanity, too. Then late one evening, I got an unexpected call from the lead detective on our case, his voice urgent. "You need to check the news right away. Selena Rogers was just apprehended." I grabbed Marcus and Eli, and we turned on the TV with trembling hands. A breaking news report showed Selena in handcuffs outside a pawn shop, stolen jewelry and electronics scattered at her feet. The very items she'd looted from our home. She cursed and spat at reporters as police stuffed her in a squad car. Selena had grown so convinced of her own invincibility that she'd slipped up and gotten caught red-handed. As the reporters recounted Selena's shocking crimes against her own family, her reputation lay in tatters, the real monster exposed underneath the pretty surface. I almost pitied her. Almost. That night, with Selena in a cell and our home protected, we finally slept in peace. The next weeks would be difficult, untangling the wreckage Selena left behind. But the storm had passed. Her lies could haunt us no more. A new dawn had broken, full of promise and hope. In the weeks after Selena's arrest, we slowly regained a sense of normalcy. With Selena locked up on multiple felony charges, the dark cloud that had choked our home finally lifted. I took Eli out for belated birthday celebrations at his favorite restaurants. Marcus and I spent evenings reminiscing about happier times before Selena's arrival. We started making plans to repair the fire damage and replenish our drained finances. There were still court dates looming. Marcus agonized over having to testify against his eldest daughter, no matter how estranged they'd become. I tried to steel my heart, reminding myself of all the suffering Selena had inflicted. Then we received shocking news. While in jail awaiting her trial, Selena had gotten into a violent fight with another inmate. The details were murky, but the results were clear. Selena was dead. Marcus took the news hardest of all. He locked himself in our room for days, torn apart with guilt. I focused my energy on comforting Eli, who despite everything felt saddened at the loss of a sister he'd never known. In the weeks that followed, we learned more disturbing details about Selena's final days. The inmate she'd clashed with claimed Selena had bragged about the rush she got from deceiving people, saying she wished she'd stolen triple the amount from us. Hearing Selena's callous words helped harden my heart. She'd felt no remorse for destroying lives. In the end, her greed and aggression had collided with someone equally vicious. With Selena gone, the case against her unraveled quickly. The bank rescinded her bogus loan applications, removing that crushing debt burden. The police helped retrieve some of our stolen funds from her apartment and storage unit. At the same time, sympathies poured in from our community, people horrified at Selena's behavior once her crimes became public. Many had known Marcus and I as a loving couple and parents for over a decade. They rallied around us, raising money to help Eli pay his college tuition. Their generosity stunned me. After writhing in Selena's web of isolation and deceit, the support of true friends felt like waking up from a nightmare. I saw it dawn on Marcus, too. We were not alone. Good people could conquer evil together. On the anniversary of Selena's death, we visited her grave for the first and only time. Marcus knelt by the modest stone and whispered a prayer. I stood back with Eli, giving them space. She wasn't born bad, Eli said quietly. Do you think if she'd made different choices, she could have been happy? I hugged my wise son close. I think we all forge our own path. Selena chose destruction, but life marches on. Now we walk in the light again. Marcus joined us, finally looking at peace. He took my hand, a gentle smile on his face. Thank you for staying by my side, he said. Your love guided me out of the darkness. Together, we turned and walked into the sunset, leaving Selena's tempestuous ghost behind. The future awaited, bright and full of hope. In the months after Selena's death, our family slowly healed. The fire damage was repaired, stolen money recovered, debts settled. Bit by bit, we reclaimed what Selena had tried destroying. But some wounds aren't visible. I woke choking from nightmares of flames engulfing our home. Marcus withdrew into himself for days at a time, brooding with guilt, and Eli became quieter, jumping at small noises and keeping his bedroom door locked. So I suggested we start seeing a family counselor. At first, Marcus resisted, ashamed at needing help, but eventually he agreed it was necessary to fully mend our battered spirits. Our sessions proved intensely cathartic. We spoke of betrayal, violation, anger. The counselor taught us coping techniques for anxiety and PTSD. He urged us to vocalize our feelings rather than bottling them up, which had strained my relationship with the brooding Marcus. I discovered depths of pain in Marcus I'd never realized. He admitted part of his desperation to help Selena stemmed from regret over his failures with her as a child during his divorce. The counselor eased his shame, reframing his efforts as misguided rather than malicious. For Eli, the greatest solace came from restoring normal routines. He rejoined school sports teams, volunteered at a homeless shelter, and took a part-time job at an ice cream parlor. Focusing on productivity and community engagement helped alleviate his sense of helplessness. 6 months later, with our counselor's approval, we decided to close the book on our tribulations with Selena. We used the last of her recovered stolen money to take a family trip to Hawaii, visiting breathtaking beaches and eating decadent dinners. No friction, no drama, just joyful quality time together. On the final night, Marcus and I renewed our vows on the beach under a sunset, Eli proudly officiating. I gazed lovingly at my 2 men, my champions. Selena had tried tearing us apart. Instead, we'd emerged stronger than ever. Not all scars fully disappear, but you can choose to wear them proudly, refusing to let past pain define you. Our family embodied that resilience. On the plane ride home, I penned a journal entry I later shared with Marcus and Eli. The past year contained agonizing trials, but also profound growth. We cling closer now, wounds healed into wisdom. Selena acted as a wicked knife, slicing open old injuries and inflicting new ones. But we 3 are the stitching, holding fast, binding up the cuts, making whole what was rent. Our imperfect family will not just survive, but thrive. The darkness recedes, healing dawns, and the light everlasting remains. Later that week, I tucked my journal away in a keepsake box. The final remnants of Selena's ruination, trial transcripts, bank statements, police reports, went into the trash for good. Marcus hugged me close. "It's finally over," he said. "Now we build something beautiful from the ashes." I smiled up at my husband, then pulled Eli into our embrace. The storm had passed, our lives stretched ahead, sunny and bright, and we would walk this new path arm in arm, faces tilted toward the light. The jarring ring of my cell phone startled me from my mundane afternoon. I fumbled to grab it from the coffee table, nearly spilling my lukewarm tea. "Hello?" I answered cautiously. The voice on the other end was one I never expected to hear again. My ex-mother-in-law, Edna. "Cassie, it's time." Her stern tone gave me chills. "How could you think of missing Silas's funeral?" I froze in disbelief. Silas, my high school sweetheart turned ex-husband, had died over a year ago, lost in a tragic car accident. At least, that was what Edna had told me herself in her last bitter phone call. "Wait, what?" I stammered. "I don't understand. Silas already." Edna cut me off sharply. "Don't play dumb. The service is tomorrow at St. Mary's." My pulse pounded as I struggled to make sense of her words. St. Mary's, where Silas and I had married 13 years ago. "Edna, you told me Silas died last January," I insisted, my voice shaking. "You said you blamed me." "And he did," she snapped. "But now he's passed again. Don't tell me you plan on disrespecting my boy by not showing up." The line went dead before I could respond. I sat paralyzed, my 4-year-old son Eli's laughter from the next room barely registering through the fog clouding my mind. Somehow in my gut, I knew Edna's call was no cruel prank. I grabbed my laptop with trembling hands, quickly typing Silas's name into the search bar. An obituary stared back at me from the glowing screen. My handsome ex-husband, frozen forever at age 32. Yesterday's date marked the finality of it in black and white. Silas was truly gone. But how? None of this made any sense. I skimmed the details of the tribute through vision blurred by tears. A tragic construction accident, survived by his wife Marcella and their infant son. Marcella. Her name jolted me as my shock morphed to anger. The woman Silas had left me for when I was pregnant with Eli. The woman who had swooped in to take my place. I shoved back the bitter memories threatening to overwhelm me. Marcella was far in my past now, just like Silas. But this funeral brought everything roaring back. Grabbing Eli's hand, I resolutely led him out the door to my car. I had to know what kind of sick game was being played here. And I refused to let Eli's rightful place be erased by the woman who had already taken so much from us. St. Mary's loomed before me more foreboding than I remembered as I marched towards it. Eli's little hand nestled securely in my grip. I did not know what I would discover inside about Silas's supposed double death, but I knew one thing for certain. I would protect my son and the truth at all costs. The pews of St. Mary's were packed, stifling even, yet an almost eerie silence still hung in the incense-filled air. I clutched Eli close as I made my way to the front, ignoring the glares and whispers cutting through me with each step. I held my breath, bracing myself for my first glimpse at the photos adorning Silas's closed casket. Sure enough, the images chilled me to my core as we approached. Smiling portraits encircled elaborate bouquets and candles, a vibrant Silas frozen in time forever at 32 years old, exactly as the recent obituary had depicted him. My gaze turned towards the largest portrait, which featured Silas embracing a woman with flowing blonde hair and a cunning smile, Marcella. Underneath it sat a makeshift playpen where Marcella's infant son kicked and cooed, oblivious to the morbid day marking his father's death. I had just bent down instinctively to soothe the crying baby when a cold hand grasped my arm. "Who do you think you're fooling?" A harsh voice spat as I spun around. I stared into the soulless gray eyes of Marcella herself, still clutching the child to her hip with a painted claw. "Get away from my son." Anger swelled within me. This fraud, raising Silas's boy, playing the role of the pretty young widow to milk this for all it was worth. It was revolting. "Didn't expect to see the ex-wife, now did you?" I seethed back, letting my contempt show. "Oh, and congratulations on the supposed tragic accident." Blood drained from Marcella's face. "Why, you little—" She sputtered, composing herself as mourners glanced our way. Her expression transformed to a well-practiced pout as she dabbed mock tears and sauntered towards the open casket. I watched with disgust as Marcella embraced Silas' parents, her sniffles loud in the pin-drop silence. Even now, her only concern was maintaining appearances for the sake of their fortune and estate. So blinded by greed that they actually believed her lies and supported this gold digger next to their only son's grave. A small hand in mine reminded me this show was not my concern anymore. I had my own flesh and blood to protect and promises to keep. The thought fueled me as I turned my back on Marcella's performance, with a resolve colder than the ice in her glare when she cried on their shoulders. She would not get away with this act of manipulation, and she would certainly never lay her claws on what was meant for Eli. Over the sobs, the priest invited us to view Silas one final time. With one last glance at Eli, we slowly approached the casket, flanked by flashy floral tributes like misplaced trophies. Lying inside, Silas looked hollow, almost diminished, a shell of the bright and vibrant soul I had once called mine. "Never forget that truth prevails over deception, no matter how wicked," I whispered softly to Eli as I squeezed his shoulder. As we left Silas to whatever peace death would bring him, I vowed we would uncover what Marcella so desperately wanted hidden behind her web of lies. The funeral took every ounce of my energy. As we exited the suffocating church, I knew uncovering Marcella's deceit was now non-negotiable. I asked my neighbor Holly, Eli's godmother, to watch him for a bit. Then I headed downtown, my heels clicking on the pavement with purpose as Silas's law firm came into view. I didn't have an appointment, but my determination must have shown. Before I could even open my mouth, his former assistant Julia embraced me in a tight hug. "Cassie? I can't believe it," she said, dabbing her eyes delicately with a monogrammed handkerchief. "First the accident, now this?" My ears perked up, senses on high alert. "Accident?" I asked. "You mean when he passed before?" Julia nodded, confusion knitting her brows. "Yes, last year. The awful car wreck out on River Road. I assumed you knew. They brought his body in and—" She trailed off with a shudder. The puzzle pieces clicked into place. There had been no tragic construction accident like Marcella declared, which meant she deliberately kept Silas's first death from me, allowing her to stage this second funeral circus under the guise of recent widowhood. Bile rose in my throat as the ugliness of her ploy came into sharp focus. By hiding Silas's initial passing, she ensured the steady flow of child support she orchestrated from my account, for Eli, right into her scheming hands. I thought I was providing for my boy, but in reality, that witch likely used every cent to fund her plush new lifestyle. As fury and disgust overwhelmed me, I managed to choke out the other burning question. "The baby, is he really Silas's?" Julia shook her head before lowering her voice to barely a whisper. "Rumor has it they were already separated when she got pregnant, but once Silas passed, she saw her opportunity." I reeled at this, the final crushing blow. In addition to using my son, this harpy had trapped my ex-in-laws with the ultimate manipulation, a motherless grandchild to dote on. Even in death, she ensured Silas's fortune would fund her through the boy's college years and beyond. Meanwhile, she attempted to erase my Eli completely, threatening his only connection to Silas's family and inheritance. Overcome with anger, I stormed out of the office, nearly knocking over a vase of lilies sent in loving memory of Silicon Valley's most ambitious lawyer. As I arrived on Marcella's manicured block, I felt containing my rage would be impossible. Sure enough, the sight of her smug smile enraged me as she rocked on the front porch with the baby nestled against her. Not today, witch, I thought. The next hour was a satisfying blur of unleashed fury as I confronted her with all I had learned. With each newly exposed truth, I relished the growing panic in her eyes. Her defeat was palpable, as I declared I would be filing a lawsuit first thing Monday morning to settle this injustice once and for all. You can slither back into whatever hole you crawled from now, I spat as I turned to leave. You'll never see another dime meant for my son. I walked away with strides full of renewed purpose. For justice, for Eli's legacy, and for the truth Silas deserved. This victory left the sweet taste of revenge on my lips at last. And tomorrow, the real fight would begin. I arrived at the lawyer's office, fueled by caffeinated determination, clutching folders full of paperwork I had gathered over the weekend. Bank statements, legal documents, Marcella's venomous threats. I was armed and ready for battle. The meeting started smoothly as I recounted my discoveries. The lawyer, Mr. Silverstein, listened thoughtfully, periodically adjusting his thin-rimmed glasses. Finally, he cleared his throat and leaned forward. While these revelations about Marcella's past schemes are certainly concerning, without concrete evidence of current illegal activities, I'm afraid there's little ground for a case, he said gently. My eager smile faded. What? She manipulated a dead man's estate for her own gain. I slid the threatening SMS messages across his desk, and she's clearly planning to deny my son his rightful inheritance. Mr. Silverstein grimaced as he perused Marcella's texts, gloating about securing power of attorney. While distasteful, her actions appear strategically within legal bounds, he said. Since you never married, your son's claim. I cut him off, unable to contain my boiling frustration. So this witch can flaunt her schemes and lies, but I'm just supposed to sit and wait for her next underhanded attack? Sighing, Mr. Silverstein removed his glasses, rubbing his tired eyes. Without proof of actual fraud, we have no grounds for legal action. My best advice would be to wait it out. I slammed my hands on the desk, trembling with anger as I rose. Unacceptable. My son's future is at stake thanks to that soulless money-grubbing... A knock interrupted my tirade. The door creaked open to reveal Julia, her eyes wide with shock. Sorry to interrupt, but Cassie, you must come quickly. Julia cried breathlessly. I just overheard Marcella on the phone with a strange man. They mentioned documents, custody. My heart seized in my chest. Marcella was already striking with her next scheme. I grabbed my bag, my mind reeling. Did you hear anything else? I asked. Julia shook her head apologetically. As we turned to rush out, Mr. Silverstein handed me a business card. Call me immediately if you uncover solid evidence of wrongdoing, he instructed firmly. With concrete proof, we can build a case. We sped back to Julia's office, where she recounted the bits of conversation she had overheard. As she mimicked the man's slimy tone, bragging about eliminating obstacles, my blood ran cold. This was beyond manipulation. Marcella had crossed over into criminality, and my son was the intended target. We had to catch her red-handed and fast. As Julia made calls checking databases, reality sank in. My days of civility were over. I had to stop reacting and take action. For Eli's sake, it was time to set the trap and play dirty. The pieces clicked into place with chilling precision. Bank statements I had discovered showed large, frequent transfers to a business associate named Derek. A quick online search of his profile made his line of work clear. And baiting this snake out of hiding would surely expose Marcella right along with him. As I plotted out the trap, adrenaline flooded my veins. By weaponizing Marcella's own ugly tactics against her, I would finally take back control. For the sake of Eli's future, her cruelty would be repaid in kind at last. This ended now. The annual Silicon Valley Law Gala was the perfect backdrop for my trap. I had discovered Marcella would be here tonight schmoozing potential investors for her new lifestyle brand. Bile rose in my throat, imagining her peddling leggings and false widowhood in the same breath. Well, not anymore. Tonight her lies would be exposed for the world to see. I had chosen my bait carefully, luring the ominous Derek to a shadowy rendezvous with the promise of a payoff. My eyewitness waited strategically behind a marble column, ready to catch every incriminating exchange on video. All that remained was springing the confrontation I had planned, so Marcella's facade would come crumbling down in front of the cream of the crop attendees. I spotted her across the ballroom, draped in an ostentatious black dress, already working the room with dramatic flair. Time to steal the spotlight, I thought, striding towards her, with rage burning through my veins. "Why, Cassie, what a surprise!" Marcella drawled, her expression morphing from warm charm to icy hatred in an instant. "I'm terribly sorry, but this is a private event. Now run along." The circle of executives glanced between us, curiosity piqued by the palpable tension. Perfect. Private event, I scoffed. More like hunting ground for your next victim right under the guise of entrepreneurship? Have you handed out catalogs showcasing your full web of lies yet? Flashes of anger and fear crossed Marcella's face. "Why, I never. Someone escort this mad woman out at once." But her feigned outrage merely made me laugh. "Come now, Marcy, why don't you share with these kind folks how you conned my grieving ex-in-laws?" I swept my arm towards the captive audience, leverage exactly as I had planned. "Tell them how you seduced my husband away and then faked widowhood twice over for access to his millions." The watching crowd murmured uncomfortably. Before Marcella could respond, her cell phone rang. With trembling hands she answered, breathless fear filling her eyes as she listened. After a long pause, she choked out, "You told me this would work, that no one would ever find out." I grinned wickedly, crossing my arms. "Trouble with your partners in crime, I take it?" Marcella stared at me wild-eyed as I continued. "Did you really think we wouldn't uncover your shady plans with that brute Derek to steal my son's inheritance?" Right on cue, Julia stepped forward clutching her phone, still recording Derek's incriminating exchange. "We have it all right here," Julia declared. "Your threats, lies, and hired thugs caught discussing falsifying custody documents." Marcella collapsed to her knees as her world crumbled around her, the damning evidence now on full display for all to witness at last. I leaned down, my tone icy. "Your games end here. You knew exactly what you stood to gain from my family's loss, and you didn't care who you destroyed in the process. Well, now the spotlight is on you." Satisfaction washed over me seeing her cowering and exposed. As security approached, Marcella searched the crowd, desperately seeking an ally, but she found only looks of disgust reflecting back at her. The bitter taste of retribution was even sweeter than I imagined. Finally, I had justice for Eli, for Silas's legacy, and above all, for the truth. Marcella's web of deception lay in ruins all around her. Now it was her turn to lose everything, and I would ensure she answered for her crimes if it was the last thing I did. The weeks following Marcella's public shaming blended together in a flurry of legal motions and strategy sessions. With evidence of her shady dealings now on full display, the battle had shifted to the courtroom. I sat calmly smoothing my dress suit as Mr. Leah Silverstein paced, reviewing our plan of attack. With the video footage clearly implicating Derek, Marcella's remaining credibility is questionable at best, he affirmed. Our case highlighting her deceit around Silas's estate and inheritance rights is quite strong. I nodded, steeling myself as we entered the imposing courtroom. Marcella sat at the defendant's table, the hollows of her cheeks betraying her normally glamorous visage. Her bloodshot eyes narrowed to slits as I held her glare with steely determination. The fantasies of my victory had kept me energized throughout sleepless nights. Today, sweet justice would finally be served. The room fell silent as the judge entered. For 3 tense hours, Mr. Silverstein presented an impenetrable wall of evidence showcasing every manipulating half-truth and bold-faced lie Marcella had spun to profit off Silas's tragic death. Phone records proved her secrecy around his actual passing. Bank statements exposed money funneled from my personal accounts straight into her pockets, and most damning, Derek's own written testimonial implicated Marcella as the true mastermind behind the plot to erase my son's claim. I watched Marcella's haughty facade slowly crack and crumble as the weight of truth exposed her deceit. As Mr. Silverstein turned the floor over to her, she sat frozen for a long minute before stammering weakly in self-defense. But her sputtering lies stood no chance now. She had no choice but to confess haltingly to concealing Silas's initial death. A gasp rippled through the gallery at this admission. When pressed about her motivation by the judge, Marcella dissolved into hysterical sobs about debts and bad investments. My lip curled in disgust, hearing her still make excuses rather than take accountability. After she composed her sniveling, the judge turned to Mr. Silverstein. In lieu of this compelling evidence, I am prepared to rule on the matter of Silas Gray's estate and inheritance rights. Please approach. This was it, the moment that had kept me fighting through countless ruthless attacks. Marcella paled as we stood next to her, awaiting the verdict that would decide my son's fate. On the matter of Silas Gray's estate, full rights shall be granted to his named next of kin, his son Elijah. My breath caught as joyful shock washed over me. Additionally, Miss Marcella Pierce will hereby repay all misallocated funds and forfeit any custody claim over the child. I blinked back grateful tears as justice rained down at long last, stripping the woman who had taken so much from my son for her own gain. The rest was a dizzying rush of celebratory hugs and phone calls to Eli, who giggled gleefully at the news. Meanwhile, Marcella sat frozen, the judge's gavel signaling her defeat. I watched as bailiffs approached to apprehend her on formal fraud charges tied to years of financial deception. As they led her shambling body past me, I stood tall, finally seeing her for the powerless coward she was, without her web of lies for protection. "You forget who you were dealing with," I said coldly. "Did you really think you could threaten my child, Silas's child, without consequence?" As she disappeared from view for good, I let the sweet taste of revenge wash over me at last. With her poisonous shadow now banished from our lives forever, Eli and I could finally embrace the bright future that was rightfully his. Justice indeed prevailed. In the weeks following the trial, I was able to breathe freely for the first time in years. Marcella was sentenced to 3 years behind bars, a satisfactory reckoning for the havoc she had wreaked on countless lives. The duty of tying up legal loose ends around Silas's estate fell to my trusted advisor, Julia. As we sat signing paperwork, joy overwhelmed me seeing Eli's inheritance fully secured at last by his rightful guardians, Silas's parents Edna and Richard. A soft knock interrupted us. Edna entered, her usual haughty aura replaced by something resembling humility. "Cassie, I can't thank you enough for what you did," she said haltingly. Richard nodded behind her, his eyes glistening. We were so blinded. We never imagined Marcella was manipulating us that entire time. I studied their faces intently. The past could never be erased, but perhaps this ordeal had opened their eyes to what mattered most now. Family. I reached across the table and squeezed Edna's hand gently. "Let's focus on the future for Eli's sake." Richard and Edna both smiled through tears. For all our rocky history, we shared an unexpected bond now as guardians of Silas's legacy. Over lunch, we laughed reminiscing about a young, vibrant Silas, the man we all loved in different ways. Edna even shared baby pictures I had never seen before. A warmth filled me realizing that perhaps some good could come from even the darkest storms. Later at home, while tucking Eli into bed, I decided to share part of the story that had led us here. I told an age-appropriate version, not mentioning Marcella by name but focusing on themes of honesty, family, and karma. His big brown eyes widened with childlike awe as I spoke. "So that mean Lady lied? Is that why you had to go fight the bad guys in court?" I kissed Eli on the forehead, my heart swelling with pride. "Yes, my smart boy, but now the truth came out, just like it always does, and that mean lady can't ever bother us again." Eli giggled and squeezed his stuffed dog, the one Silas had given him years ago. "Well, I'm glad, 'cause now we get to stay with Grandma and Grandpa and inherit Daddy's big building downtown." I had to laugh at his innocent understanding of the legal complexity, but in his eyes shone the optimism and hope I had fought so hard to protect. Over the next year, life took on a beautiful rhythm I had scarcely allowed myself to imagine. Weekday breakfasts with Grandma and Grandpa, Sunday picnics reminiscing about Silas while Eli played, laughter, joy, and new memories bonding us together after so much loss. The only dark cloud still lingering was my regular visit to a maximum security prison to stare Marcella down as she crumbled mentally and physically under the weight of her crimes. To some it may have seemed cruel satisfaction, but having her fate sealed behind those unforgiving walls gave me peace of mind. Soon the anniversary of Silas's death arrived, a bittersweet milestone, marking the closing of a painful chapter. We gathered as a family at his grave, each placing a rose while Eli babbled happily about his daddy. I gasped as Eli suddenly froze, pointing behind us all starry-eyed. "Look, it's Daddy!" he squealed. "Hi, Daddy!" We all turned with a start, seeing nothing but a glowing sunbeam breaking through the clouds. But somehow, I knew in that moment, Silas's spirit swirled around us, and through Eli's eyes, he witnessed the justice, closure, and family his memory deserved. Finally, we could all rest peacefully, thanks to the truth rising at last. The past was finally laid to rest on this sacred ground. Another year slipped by, filled with healing and closure. Our family grew closer than I ever could have imagined. Eli flourished with the love and support of 2 doting grandparents, and I found meaning embracing my role protecting Silas's legacy. But lingering darkness still occupied my thoughts. Marcella deserved to rot in prison, yet her continued existence so close by prevented me from ever fully moving on. The time had come for a fresh start, far away from the ghosts of past betrayal. My decision made, I gently broke the news to Edna and Richard over family dinner. Edna lowered her fork, eyes glistening with emotion. "Oh, Cassie, must you really go?" she asked softly. "These years with you and Eli have meant the world to us." I squeezed her hand, my own eyes welling up. "I'll forever be grateful for how you welcomed Eli, but too many memories haunt me here." I glanced at Eli playing happily. He deserves to grow up free from the shadows of his father's past. Richard cleared his throat gruffly. "We understand, dear. A clean slate is what you both need. But please, let us help set you up so Eli's future is secure." My heart swelled at this gesture. The ultimate display of love for the grandson they almost lost. That means everything. Thank you both, truly. Over the next few weeks, I tied up loose ends while Edna and Richard handled real estate and financial logistics. The day of our move finally arrived, bittersweet yet brimming with hope. Edna fussed over Eli, sneaking cookies and treats into his luggage when she thought I wasn't looking. As we stood at the front door for final goodbyes, the weight of the moment sank in. Edna pulled me into a crushing hug. "Promise you'll let us visit very soon?" she asked tearfully. "Maybe for Eli's next birthday?" I smiled through my own tears. "Of course, you're both welcome anytime. Take good care of Richard, okay?" Edna chuckled wetly with a wink. After one final check that Eli was securely buckled in his car seat, we all exchanged final hugs. As I shifted the car into drive, Eli cried, "Bye, Grandma! Bye, Grandpa!" while frantically waving his little hand. We drove in silence for a while, fields and farms zipping past outside. I breathed deeply, déjà vu washing over me from that pivotal drive to Silas's second funeral years ago. So much life had happened since. "Where are we going, Mommy?" Eli suddenly piped up from the back seat. I smiled at his bright eyes in the rearview mirror. "We're going to start a new adventure, baby. New city, new house. Doesn't that sound exciting?" Eli nodded enthusiastically. "Will I make new friends?" "Oh, and visit Daddy, too?" My heart fluttered hearing his innocent understanding. "Yes, my sweet boy, all of that and more. A fresh start for you and me." I clicked on the radio as a beloved song came on, the same one played at Silas's wedding during our first dance. My pulse quickened at the serendipity. Glancing in the mirror again, I was struck by Eli's resemblance to his father, his same kind eyes and grin. Silas's presence filled the space around us, enveloping me in warmth and propelling us onwards, towards the new memories we would make, carrying his spirit in our hearts forever. The past was finally laid to rest. Now nothing but open road and bright skies ahead, ready for our new beginning. The warmth of the fireplace did little to chase away the chill that crept down my spine as Marianne's piercing gaze fell upon me. "Well, Avery, dear, I must say that dress is interesting," she said, her ruby-red lips curling into a smile that never reached her eyes. I forced a polite grin, my cheeks flushing. "Thank you, Marianne. It's one of my favorites." "I can see why." Elliot's mother gave a tinkling laugh that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. "So bold and unique, just like you. Although I do wonder if it's quite appropriate for this family dinner." My mouth went dry as I looked at Elliot, silently pleading for him to intervene. But he just stared down at his plate, shoulders tense. You know how much we value tradition in this household, Marianne continued, her syrupy tone a sharp contrast to the barbs in her words. We wouldn't want to make anyone uncomfortable. The room seemed to shrink around me as the rest of the family remained silent observers. My vision blurred with unshed tears that I blinked back furiously. This was supposed to be a warm welcome into the Halden family after my marriage to Elliot. Instead, I felt like an ill-fitting pawn being scrutinized. Of course, Mother, I choked out. I'll be more mindful next time. Wonderful. She clapped her hands together delicately. Now, why don't you tell us a bit more about yourself, dear? We're just dying to get to know you better. I opened my mouth, but the words stuck in my throat as her cold eyes bored into me. In that moment, I realized this was about more than just my dress choice. This was Marianne establishing her dominance, a chilling power play that left me disoriented. Some distant part of me registered the uncomfortable silence stretching on until Elliot cleared his throat. Actually, Mother, I think that's enough for tonight. Avery's had a long day. The rabbit hole didn't seem to end as the weeks ticked by in our new home. If anything, Marianne's needling demands only escalated, from explicit instructions on how to properly set the dinner table to casual comments belittling my career ambitions. And Elliot, my once loving husband, simply watched in silence as his mother's barbs chipped away at my sense of self piece by piece. It became a dizzying cycle of appeasing Marianne's every whim, lest I face the consequences of her wrath through icy rebukes or underhanded reminders of how I was an outsider here. But it was the disappointed looks from Elliot that cut deepest, each one another jagged crack spreading across the dream I had for our marriage. In those early days of our new life together, I was drowning, gasping for air in a twisted game I didn't know the rules to, and Marianne seemed determined to keep me unbalanced through her sinister passive aggression, all while wearing a sickly sweet smile, of course, because that was the Halden family way. At first, the changes in Elliot were so subtle, I easily chalked them up to the stress of starting our new life together. A forgotten birthday here, a canceled date night there, small things that I excused as just part of getting into a new groove as newlyweds. But soon, those slight oversights spiraled into something darker, something that made my heart clench every time I saw the disappointment and disdain hardening in his eyes. This pot roast is dry as a bone, he grumbled one night, jabbing his fork moodily into the meat. Honestly, Avery, how many times do I have to show you? I opened my mouth, then snapped it shut as Marianne swept into the dining room. Now, Elliot, that's no way to speak to your wife. Her nostrils flared as she pinned me with an icy stare, although Avery should know better by now. The lump in my throat threatened to choke me as I looked at Elliot pleadingly, desperate for him to defend me like he used to. But he just shrugged, already shoveling another forkful of the dry pot roast into his mouth. That night was only the beginning. Pretty soon, Elliot's callous comments became as commonplace as Marianne's constant critiques of my abilities as a wife and daughter-in-law. He'd track mud into the house and then snap at me for not anticipating his needs. I'd burn dinner, and he'd throw the plate across the kitchen in a rage. All the while, Marianne watched like a hawk, her curved lips stretching into a satisfied smile every time Elliot willingly played his role. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks one afternoon when I foolishly asked Elliot if he wanted to grab lunch together before his next meeting. Don't be ridiculous, he scoffed, already shrugging on his suit jacket. You know Mother prefers I'm back promptly after appointments to discuss business matters. My heart plummeted into my stomach as I watched him hurry out the door, not even a backward glance in my direction. That's when the harsh truth finally clicked into place. Marianne had enveloped us so fully in her twisted web that Elliot was utterly beholden to her every rule. My husband was a shell of his former self, his love for me dulled by years of psychological conditioning at his mother's hand, and I was slowly being suffocated by her ruthless control over our family, gasping for air in a life I no longer recognized. Oh, Avery, you're pouting again. Marianne's sickly sweet voice rang out from behind me. I spun around, jaw clenched, as she sicked loudly and shook her head. When will you learn? In that moment, something inside me twisted and snapped. I could no longer swallow down the bitter truth. If I stayed on this path, Marianne would grind me into the dirt until I was a vacant, submissive shadow of my former self. Just like Elliot. No, that was not the life I wanted. Not for me. Not for anyone. And as I met her cold gaze steadily, a new flame of determination was lit from the dying embers inside me. If Marianne wanted a battle, she would get one, with everything I had, because this time I would be the one calling the shots. The annual Halden Family Charity Gala was supposed to be a lighthearted affair, a chance for the town's elite to mingle and pat themselves on the back over champagne and hors d'oeuvres. But this year would be different. This year, I had a plan. As I descended the staircase in my crisp azure gown, clutching Elliot's arm, I saw Marianne's eyes narrow ever so slightly. Her well-practiced smile wavered just for an instant before settling back into that familiar saccharine mask. "Why, Avery? You clean up nicely," she purred as we reached the bottom of the stairs. "Although I do wish you'd done something a bit more sophisticated with your hair." My grip on Elliot's arm tightened, but he remained stoically impassive, refusing to even look at me, just like I knew he would. The night blazed on in a whirlwind of fake laughter and insincere compliments that made my skin crawl. I smiled woodenly, one hand clutching my champagne flute like a lifeline, as Marianne's barbs continued unchecked. "It really is too bad you never finished your college degree, dear," she said loudly during Aovek, her voice carrying across the crowded ballroom. We Haldens do so value a prestigious education. A hush fell over our little group as I felt dozens of eyes boring into me, awaiting my stuttered excuse like they'd grown accustomed to over the years. But not this time. This time, the anger roaring in my ears drowned out any shred of remaining intimidation. "Actually, Marianne, I seem to recall you dropping out as well," I said coolly, taking a dainty sip of my champagne. "To start a family, was it?" Her perfectly lined lips parted in shock as hushed murmurs began rippling through our audience. Out of the corner of my eye, I caught a glimpse of Elliot's father, Douglas, suppressing a grin before Marianne's voice sliced through the tension again. "Well, I never. You'd do well to watch your tone, young lady," she hissed, color blooming high on her cheeks. "I've half a mind to." "To what, Marianne?" I cut her off, something inside me finally snapping free. "Continue your sad attempts to belittle and control me? Save your breath, because I'm simply done playing your twisted little games." I leveled my gaze at Elliot, who shrank back, a deer in the headlights. "Or has your mother not told you about her plans to remove me from your lives? To wipe me from the picture completely so she can find you a more suitable bride to further the Halden legacy?" An icy silence hung in the air, punctuated only by Marianne's ragged breathing as her mask shattered completely. I could taste the fear rolling off her in dizzying waves, smell the acrid stench of her desperation. The crowd seemed to sway around me as I looked from Elliot's pale, stricken face to Marianne, and then to Douglas, the first inkling of hope in his eyes for longer than I could remember. With a sickening lurch, the weight of my entrapment these past few years finally hit me like a physical blow. The lies, the belittling, the silent torment, all at the hands of this vile woman and her puppet of a son. Something inside me finally broke free as the last threads of fear dissolved away, replaced by a calmness I hadn't felt in years. A foreign power seemed to uncurl within me, urging me not to flee this time, but to stand my ground. To fight. The whispers were growing louder now, but I barely heard them over the roaring in my ears as I tossed back the last of my champagne and smiled at Marianne. "No, I'm afraid the games are just beginning." The deafening silence that followed my outburst at the gala was finally broken by the harsh clack of Marianne's heels as she stormed away, her face twisted into a mask of rage. Elliot trailed after her, throwing me one last haunted look before disappearing into the crowd. I stood rooted to the spot, my heart thundering in my ears as the world slowly bled back into focus. Hushed whispers and scandalized gasps swirled around me, but I barely registered them over the chorus of voices in my mind. What had I done? After years of keeping my head down, something had snapped inside of me in that heated moment. An overwhelming urge to shatter the heavy silence, to unravel this twisted tapestry Marianne had woven around our family. Trembling, I turned to Douglas, the first man I'd ever seen stand up to his domineering wife. He placed a wizened hand on my arm, his eyes shining with the first hint of resolve I'd witnessed in years. "You did the right thing, Avery," he murmured gruffly. "The truth had to come out, no matter how ugly." His earnest words should have been a balm, helping ease the searing guilt and shock pulsing through my veins. But they did little to chase away the nagging sense of dread coiling in the pit of my stomach, because I knew this was only the beginning. My grand public outburst may have rattled Marianne's cage, but the real fallout was yet to come. She would retaliate, of that I was certain, which meant I needed to be prepared to fight back with everything I had. That realization was what finally spurred me into action over the next few days, as the harsh condemnations and scandalized whispers engulfed our family. While Elliot holed up in his study in a drunken stupor, I began to gather what little evidence I could. Damning financial statements, detailing the misappropriation of Halden family funds, sworn affidavits from Marianne's hired staff recounting her unhinged verbal tirades, a trove of secret recordings spanning years, each one more incriminating than the last. I compiled my case meticulously, letting the smoldering embers of my anger drive me forward as I prepared for the battle to come. Because one thing had become painfully clear. Marianne would stop at nothing to regain control over her kingdom, and I would be her prime target. The breaking point came one night after another of Elliot's inevitable blow-ups, his voice hoarse from screaming about the humiliation I'd brought upon this family. I had hidden in the pantry, my breath coming in raggedy pants as his venomous words hit their mark again and again, until finally I heard the telltale click of Marianne's heels against the hardwood and the murmur of their hushed conversation filtering through the cracked door. "Get rid of her." Marianne's low, steely voice made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. "She's become much too unruly, much too dangerous to our family's interests." Unable to contain myself a moment longer, I leaned in closer until their poisonous whispers became clear as day. And that's when I heard the evidence I'd been subconsciously seeking all along. The final, damning confession that any shed of humanity had long been snuffed out in this family. The gloves were off. The time for playing Marianne's twisted games was over, because now it was my turn to fight fire with fire. As the whispered threats from Marianne and Elliot's hushed confession echoed in my mind, a strange calmness washed over me. No more walking on eggshells, no more forcing smiles as I was pecked apart from the inside. This was war. And I would be ready. The next morning, I awoke before dawn and quietly slipped out of the house before Elliot or Marianne could stir. My footsteps were the only sound on the deserted downtown streets as I made my way to the one place I knew I could find allies, Everly's Diner. The tinkling of the bell above the door was like a soothing balm as the familiar scents of bacon and freshly brewed coffee enveloped me. This place had been my haven in those first few strained years of marriage, when I could still escape Marianne's clutches for a few blessed hours. "Well, if it isn't my favorite customer!" Janice, the owner, emerged from the kitchen, a hesitant smile playing across her lips, as she took in my undoubtedly haggard appearance. "Rough night, hon? You could say that." The words were already tumbling out before I could stop them. The revelations at the gala, the whispered threats, my finally reaching the breaking point. As I spilled everything, I watched Janice's eyes widen, one wrinkled hand flying to cover her mouth. "Oh, darlin', I always knew that woman was nothin' but a snake," she muttered, shaking her head slowly. "But to go that far, to actually try hurting you like that, that's a new low, even for her." An unexpected surge of relief coursed through me at her words, as if finally hearing someone else validate my pain and experiences made it all just a little more bearable. I opened my mouth, about to try explaining myself further when the bell above the door jangled again. "There you are." A familiar voice rang out as Lila, my best friend from college, rushed over and enveloped me in a bone-crushing hug. Janice called and told me everything. "Avery, I'm so sorry I wasn't there for you all this time. If I'd known what was really going on." Her voice cracked with emotion, and I instinctively tightened my arms around her. Lila had been the closest thing to family I had in those first few years of my marriage before Marianne's isolating tactics finally pushed her away. "You're here now," I murmured, forcing a watery smile as she finally pulled back. "That's what matters." Damn straight. Lila swiped away the tears trickling down her cheeks before squaring her shoulders determinedly. So what's the plan, Av? How can I help take that bitch down? My lips twitched in a real smile this time at the fierce protectiveness blazing in her eyes. Because that's exactly what I needed now, someone with claws out who was ready to fight. Well, for starters, I need to gather more evidence, I began, the gears in my mind already turning. Anything I can use to expose Marianne and get these people off my back once and for all. I was thinking... You were thinking it's time to play a little hardball. A new voice cut me off. I turned to see Charlie, my friend Lila's older brother, and a hotshot corporate lawyer, sweeping into the diner. A slow grin spread across his face as he took in my questioning look. Lila called me from the road, he explained with a shrug. Said my brilliant college pal was finally ready to stand up for herself. So, he rubbed his hands together. What kind of trouble are we stirring up? As I laid out the pieces I'd gathered so far, I could feel the weight temporarily lifting from my shoulders. For the first time in years, I wasn't alone in this fight. I finally had people, friends, in my corner who were ready to go to battle. No more passive silence, no more turning the other cheek as Marianne and her minions sought to drown me. This time, I would be the one putting up a fight. This time, the predators would become the prey. The next few weeks flew by in a whirlwind of clandestine meetings and furtive evidence gathering as Lila, Charlie, and I built an airtight case against Marianne and her web of deceit. Papers were meticulously organized into binders. Undercover surveillance captured hushed confrontations and damning admissions. A steely sense of determination took root inside me, unfurling with each incriminating piece we unearthed. By the time the annual Halden Hospitality Charity Gala arrived, I could feel the palpable tension thrumming through my veins. This would be the moment of truth, the culmination of weeks of secret planning, my chance to cut through the smothering silence once and for all. You've got this, Lila murmured as we did final checks in the courthouse bathroom. Her fingers deftly fluffed my hair as her gaze met mine in the mirror, a silent message passing between us. No more fear, no more games. When we emerged into the marbled lobby a few minutes later, the gilded ballroom was already buzzing with Woodbrook's elite in their tuxedoed finery. Champagne flutes glinted under the soft candlelight as mingled laughter and chatter filled the air. I could feel hundreds of eyes trailing over me as I deliberately wove through the crowd, clutching the overflowing case binder to my chest like a shield. A hush seemed to fell over the crowd with each step, until finally I reached the center of the polished dance floor. Good evening, everyone, I said in a clear, ringing voice, flashing them all a brilliant smile. I'd like to take a moment to celebrate the generous philanthropists in our community who have gone to such great lengths to give back. A smattering of hesitant applause followed along with a few bewildered looks. Out of the corner of my eye, I watched Marianne stiffen, the color draining from her perfectly made-up face. Of course, I continued lightly, there are a few individuals here tonight who have been rather generous with their philanthropy, shall we say. As I spoke, I deposited the binder on a nearby table with a dull thud and began paging through the damning evidence. Embezzling funds from local charities and family trusts to fuel lavish lifestyles and keep up appearances, betraying the trust and confidence of those who believed in their philanthropic integrity. My voice remained maddeningly calm, even as Marianne's face contorted with rage and panic flickered in Elliot's eyes. As more and more details tumbled from my lips, a deafening silence fell over the crowd, broken only by the flutter of papers and my inexorable narration. Then, of course, we have the less legal dalliances to account for as well. I leveled my gaze squarely at Elliot now, holding up glossy photographic proof of his indiscretions for all to see. Cavorting with strange women, deceiving his faithful wife, all while hiding behind this thin veneer of community-minded chivalry. The hushed gasps of shock seemed to reverberate against the vaulted ceilings now, shattered only by the guttural scream that finally tore free from Marianne's throat. Wild-eyed and trembling, she looked every bit the caged animal as security began closing in from all sides. In that crystalline moment of reckoning, I could see the final shreds of her meticulously constructed facade disintegrating into ash right before me. There would be no more lies, no more manipulations under the guise of propriety. For the first time since she'd callously destroyed my naive dreams of familial belonging all those years ago, I felt a savage sense of victory coursing through my veins unfettered. The karmic wheel had finally turned, and Marianne was powerless to stop it. As two burly guards moved to apprehend her, Marianne's gaze found mine one final time, feral and burning with hatred. But this time her venom held no power, sliding harmlessly away as the last of the fear dissolved inside me, because in that moment I was the master of her supposed checkmate. The thunderous silence that followed Marianne's dramatic arrest seemed to stretch into eternity. I could taste the collective shock and disbelief like a palpable force as the once venerable Halden family imploded before their eyes. For a fleeting moment, Elliot and I locked gazes across the ballroom floor. His expression was utterly inscrutable, eyes hollow and glazed as twin trails of moisture streaked his ashen cheeks. Then, just as quickly as the spell had woven between us, it shattered, splintering into 1,000 unspoken recriminations and shards of dashed hopes. Elliot's jaw hardened and he turned on his heel, retreating into the claustrophobic crowd as if I were the villain here, as if I had been the jackal systematically stripping our family apart, piece by piece. The bitter taste of defeat nearly choked me until a warm hand came to rest on my shoulder. I turned to see Douglas, the shrunken shell of a man suddenly seeming decades older than his years. "You did what you had to do," he murmured, his words barely audible over the rising din of panicked murmuring. "She left you no choice." A knot I didn't realize I'd been carrying seemed to loosen ever so slightly at his reassurance. For so long, he had been just another one of Marianne's puppets, helpless against the manipulations of his monstrous wife. But now, in the wake of this cataclysmic shake-up, I could see the first faint flickers of hope rekindling in his rheumy eyes. The iron manacles were finally loosening. "For what it's worth, I'm sorrier than you'll ever know," Douglas continued hoarsely, gnarled fingers tightening around my arm in a vice grip. "Marianne, she was always the strong one, the immovable force, and I let myself become malleable, too cowed to ever stand up to her toxic ways until it was far too late." His throat bobbed as he swallowed hard, face etched with regret. "You didn't deserve any of what she put you through, Avery. But maybe now, maybe there's a chance to start fresh." I could only nod numbly, too overwhelmed to find any words of forgiveness or comfort. Because in that moment, surrounded by the wreckage of his shattered legacy, Douglas was beyond consoling. No, there would be no easy path forward now, not for any of us. The Halden family as we'd known it was irreparably broken, the bedrock foundation built on lies and deceit. As the gaping crowd parted like the Red Sea, Marianne reappeared between her two hulking security escorts. No longer the impeccably coiffed ice queen, her coppery hair askew and mascara streaking her crimson cheeks in muddy rivulets. But her slate eyes still gleamed with that familiar vindictive light as they bored into me. "You ungrateful, malicious little cur," she spat, the haunting words cutting through the silent ballroom. "After everything I sacrificed for this family, gave you people so you could keep living in your pathetic delusions of grandeur." One of the guards made a move to silence her, but Marianne merely wrenched free, her lips peeling back in a manic snarl. "Don't think this is over. You hear me, Avery? I'll make you regret the day you ever set foot in this town and tried to sully the Halden name." Her vicious threats hung in the air like a dark miasma as I watched the sad, broken remnants of her once imperious persona be dragged away. No, this was far from over, I realized with a chill. Marianne's stubborn claws would remain sunk in deep, poisoning any chance at peaceful resolution until her dying breath. As the ballroom seemed to gradually swirl back into motion around me, the first tangled threads of uncertainty began weaving their way through my momentary vindication. Because one thing had become resoundingly clear, there would be no clean slates here. No easy path to redemption or letting go of the past. Not when it came to the deep, soul-scarring rift Marianne had rent into our fractured family. The only path forward now was to finish what I'd started, no matter how ugly the finale. The months following the cataclysmic unraveling of the Halden family legacy were a cyclonic blur. Attorneys, court appearances, endless hearings, it all bled together into a surreal waking dream as I weathered the fallout. True to her malicious vow, Marianne fought tooth and nail against the charges, her snarling defiance echoing through oak-paneled courtrooms like the unrelenting screeches of a wild animal. Evidence be damned, she seemed determined to drag us all down into her scorched earth spiral of destruction before finally admitting defeat. But in the end, the truth proved insurmountable. The house of lies she'd so meticulously constructed came crumbling down in an avalanche of convictions and seized assets. I could only look on in muted triumph as the once untouchable Marianne Halden was led away in shackles, her raging accusations buried under the weight of her own hubris. For Elliot, there could be no easy escape from his silent complicity either. Faced with his own damning trail of evidence, adulterous entanglements, misused funds, illegal business dealings, my husband eventually accepted a plea deal. His sentence was lighter than his mother's, but the cost was steep nonetheless. Public humiliation, hefty fines, and a lifetime of untangling his father's ravaged business affairs. As for Douglas, the tragic patriarch displayed a weariness that went far beyond his years as the curtain closed on this ugliest of family dramas. He retreated from the prying eyes of the community, content to quietly pick up the pieces of his shattered empire alone. Well, not entirely alone. For in a gesture I never could have foreseen, he summoned me to his study one rain-swept evening with an unexpected offering, a shocking sum of restitution and an even more stunning apology. You never deserved the venom my wife unleashed, nor my own cowardice in enabling her toxic behavior, he rasped, calloused fingers caressing a worn photograph of family happier times. But I hope this can be a step towards making amends for the suffering you endured on my watch. I opened my mouth to protest, but Douglas raised a withered hand, his eyes shimmering with a fragile hope. Take it, Avery. For once in your life, take something you never had to fight tooth and nail for. Build yourself a legacy untainted by the rot of this family. His gruff words should have felt like a balm after such harrowing turmoil. And yet, as I accepted the oversized check with trembling hands, my heart felt strangely hollow. Because no amount of reckoning or restitution could ever absolve the scars that had been carved into my soul by this once revered family. Those wounds would never fully heal, I realized with a pang of melancholy. Even now, stripped of their wealth and clout, the Haldens maintained an invisible hold over me, their ghosts lingering in the farthest reaches of my psyche, like insidious wraiths. But rather than allowing their toxic legacy to tighten around me once more, I would take Douglas's offering and finally forge my own path forward. So as the weeks and seasons gradually shifted once more, I did just that. Carefully channeling the still smoldering embers of anger simmering within, I began investing and planning, slowly, meticulously building my own empire from the ashes of the old. It started small, just a little community arts program for underprivileged youth that had been a lifelong dream. Then, as my nest egg blossomed into more ambitious ventures, the initiatives multiplied. Before long, I was able to establish a formidable foundation in my own name, dedicated to empowering women who had faced abuse and marginalization at the hands of toxic power structures. With every new achievement and hard-won victory, I could feel the icy grip of the past gradually loosening its hold over my battered soul, the all-consuming rage and thirst for vengeance slowly giving way to a renewed sense of purpose and strength from within. It would be naive to think the scars could ever fully fade, that the haunting specter of Marianne's abuse wouldn't still linger in the darkest recesses of my heart, appearing in my most vulnerable moments like a malevolent phantasm. But now, finally, I had reclaimed the power to exorcise those demons in whatever form they took. The cycle of toxicity had been broken once and for all, replaced by the first blushes of a new day. A day where I was no longer just surviving, but finally thriving, as the master of my own rebirth. My baby's coming. I figured you'd want to celebrate with a little gift, say $15,000. I nearly dropped my phone at the audacity in my sister Eliza's voice. After everything she'd put me through, now she had the nerve to ask me for money? You can't be serious, I said, gripping the phone tightly. You honestly think I'm going to give you $15,000? Eliza laughed lightly as if this were all some joke between sisters. Oh, come on, Arya. I know we've had our differences, but blood is thicker than water, right? It's your niece or nephew. I bit my tongue, a dozen scathing retorts on the tip of it. Eliza, my younger sister by barely a year, had always been jealous of me. It twisted into something dark when I started dating Max in college. I thought he loved me, until Eliza seduced him away in my senior year. They rushed into a Vegas wedding shortly after. The ultimate betrayal. I took a deep breath, trying to calm my anger. I'm sorry you seem to be struggling, but I cannot personally loan you any money. I have my own family to think of now. My husband Lucas walked into the kitchen just then, our 5-year-old Lily jumping into his arms with a squeal. They were my world now. Lucas raised an eyebrow at my tense expression. "Who's that on the phone?" he mouthed. I mimed a money gesture, and he rolled his eyes. "Let me guess. Your sister?" He'd never forgiven Eliza for what she did to me back then. Lucas was the one who helped me move on, who showed me what real love is. I nodded and put the phone on speaker. Eliza's sugary voice filled the room. "Least you could do is send a nice gift for the baby shower." Lucas set Lily down gently. "Why should we celebrate someone who caused you so much pain?" He crossed his arms. "What's brought this on anyway? You haven't spoken to Eliza in years." "You're right," I said firmly into the phone. "We wish you well, Eliza, but we cannot assist you financially or otherwise." Her tone turned icy. "Can't or won't? Don't pretend you're still not angry. I married Max," she snorted. "So petty, Arya." I stiffened, the years-old wound throbbing as painfully as ever. Lucas gestured for the phone, and I passed it over wordlessly. "Eliza," Lucas said in his detective voice, "consider this a warning. Do not contact my wife again." He hung up with an air of finality before turning to me, his eyes gentle. "Are you okay?" I let out a shuddering breath as he pulled me close. I just wasn't expecting her to call like that. Asking for money? Unbelievable. Lily wandered over and hugged my legs. I leaned down to lift her up, pressing a kiss to her hair. No matter what Eliza said, I had everything I needed right here. I tucked Lily into bed that night, my mind still reeling from Eliza's call. Lucas came up behind me, wrapping his arms around my waist. "Penny for your thoughts?" he murmured. I leaned back into him with a sigh. I just can't believe she would ask me for money after everything, and then to accuse me of still being jealous? Lucas turned me to face him, his eyes searching mine. "Do you want to tell me exactly what happened between you two and Max? Maybe it would help to talk it through." I nodded slowly. Lucas knew the basics, that my sister stole my boyfriend and married him, but the full story was still painful to share. "Eliza was always jealous of me growing up," I began quietly. "I was the smart one, the popular one. Got better grades, more friends. When I started dating Max sophomore year of college, she hated that I had something she didn't." My hands curled into fists at the memory. She started hanging around more when Max came over, flirting with him right in front of me. He didn't even notice at first, but over time... I closed my eyes. I guess she wore him down. Next thing I knew, he's breaking up with me out of nowhere, and a week later I find out he eloped with Eliza in Vegas. Lucas shook his head, his jaw tight. "I'm so sorry she put you through that, Arya. It's a horrible thing to have happen." I wiped away an angry tear. "You know what the worst part was? She rubbed it in my face, kept telling me I was just jealous because she was better than me, happier than me." I let out a harsh laugh. I cut ties completely after the wedding. Hadn't talked to her since. "Until today?" Lucas finished grimly. He considered for a moment. "What do you say we get a little justice, love?" I peered up at him in surprise. "What do you mean?" His eyes glinted. "As a detective, I have resources, contacts. What if we found out what Eliza was really up to these days? Because I guarantee you it's not all rosy. She wouldn't be asking you for money otherwise." Considering it sent a spike of anticipation through me. "You mean, expose whatever shady stuff she and Max are doing? For revenge?" "Call it justice." Lucas tilted my chin up. "Maybe it's time Eliza gets a taste of her own medicine. What do you say?" I thought of the years of humiliation Eliza put me through, the self-righteous smirk I knew would be on her face at that baby shower, asking me for money as if she deserved a single cent. An unfamiliar anger flooded through me, but I didn't fight it. Instead, I turned to Lucas with blazing eyes. "Let's do it." "So what's the plan?" I asked Lucas eagerly over breakfast the next morning. Lily was occupied with her coloring book, allowing us to scheme openly. Lucas sipped his coffee, his eyes glinting. "I made a few discreet inquiries about Eliza and Max last night. Still waiting to hear back from my contacts, but if there's dirt to be found, we'll dig it up. Excitement and nerves twisted in my stomach. I still can't believe we're actually doing this, snooping into their lives, looking for revenge. Lucas reached over to squeeze my hand. Hey, don't think of it like revenge. Think of it as veering their karma back on course. I let out a small laugh. Well, when you put it like that. I shook my head, growing serious once more. I meant what I said last night. Eliza has this coming. After the way she tormented me, manipulated Max. My voice hardened. She destroyed our relationship, my trust in people. She deserves justice. Too right, love. Lucas's phone buzzed and he glanced down. Well now, got an interesting tidbit already. I leaned forward eagerly as Lucas showed me the text. Got recent financials for E&M. Multiple weird payments from offshore accounts. Sending you records now. This could be promising. My pulse quickened. What exactly had Eliza and Max gotten themselves into? Just then, Lily popped up with her coloring book. All done with my picture, Mommy. Wanna see? I smoothed down her hair with a smile. Of course, sweetheart. It's beautiful. Over her head, I met Lucas's gaze. Why don't you go play in your room for a bit, okay? Mommy and Daddy need to talk. She skipped off happily, and Lucas pulled out his laptop, opening the files his contact had sent. My nerves spiked at the walls of text full of numbers and transactions. Lucas gave a low whistle. Well, these two have certainly been busy. He scrolled through rapidly. Lots of money coming in from offshore accounts like my guy said, and... His brow furrowed. Money being transferred back out to various charities? What? I grabbed the laptop, skimming through the listed charities. Most seemed legitimate. Children's hospitals, wildlife conservation groups. Are they laundering money through charity donations? It's looking that way. Lucas's expression hardened. Pretty despicable, using good causes to hide illicit funds. He cracked his knuckles. Oh yes, these two are going down, but first... He reached over to grip my hand tightly. We're gonna make them hurt. I have an idea. He outlined his plan, the baby shower gift that would set our revenge scheme in motion. My pulse pounded with anticipation, and I squeezed Lucas's hand fiercely. After today, Eliza's so-called perfect life would come crashing down, and this time, I would be the one looking down on her with satisfaction. Let's give my sister the rude awakening she deserves, I said, meeting Lucas's fiery gaze. The games were about to begin. The day of Eliza's baby shower arrived, my stomach churning with nerves and anticipation. You ready for this? Lucas asked as we got into his car, our gift for Eliza tucked carefully into a gift bag on the back seat. The contents, a $250 donation to a charity for fraud victims made in Eliza's name, would hopefully expose her shady financial activities to her inner circle. I smoothed my hands down my dress, taking a deep breath. As ready as I'll ever be. Let's do this. We pulled up outside the baby shower venue, an ostentatious mansion that set my teeth on edge. Of course, Eliza would choose somewhere flashy to impress her guests. We walked in to find the party already in full swing. I scanned the room, spotting Eliza holding court in the center, pregnancy glow on full display. My hands tightened around Lucas's arm, time for her charade to end. Eliza's face lit up with practiced delight when she saw us. Aria, you came, and you brought a gift, how sweet. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. Max hovered behind her, face impassive. Congratulations, I forced out. Lucas just nodded, his dislike evident. An awkward silence fell. The other guests whispered curiously. Eliza laughed too loudly. Well, don't just stand there. Come in. We're about to open presents. We followed her to the gift table. I held my breath as she picked up our bag eagerly, no doubt hoping for a stack of cash. Her face froze as she read the charity certificate inside. What is this? She looked up sharply, the first cracks appearing in her polite facade. A donation, to help those harmed by fraud. Lucas said meaningfully, we thought you'd appreciate such a fitting gift. Eliza's eyes blazed. The party guests stared. What exactly do you mean by that? Eliza bit out. Max stepped forward, face darkening. Watch yourself, detective. It's interesting how defensive they're getting, no? Lucas interrupted loudly. Makes you wonder what they might be hiding. His eyes swept the silent crowd, planting seeds of doubt. Eliza advanced on us, sharp and swollen at once. How dare you try and ruin my shower with these disgusting insinuations? Her shrill voice echoed in the hushed room. I stepped forward, agnos of hurt and rage rising up. How dare you show up in my life again asking for money, as if you didn't steal everything from me? I seethed loudly. Gasps rose. Lucas restrained Eliza as she lunged at me. Her perfect facade lay shattered on the floor with our gift wrapping. Lucas eyed the stunned guests. We'll see ourselves out. Give our regards to the happy couple. He spun on his heel, whisking me away. We left chaos in our wake. Eliza screeching, guests questioning, her flawless reputation unraveling before my eyes. Finally, it was her turn to hurt. As Lucas and I drove away, I let out a shaky breath. Our revenge had only just begun, but seeing Eliza exposed and outraged felt sweeter than I imagined. She wasn't going to get away with this unscathed. For the first time, I truly believed that. And it was freeing. In the aftermath of the baby shower showdown, my phone blew up with angry voicemails from Eliza. I ignored each one, blood still buzzing from the confrontation. Lucas and I lay in bed that night rehashing the fallout. "Did you see her face when she opened that gift?" I said gleefully. "She absolutely lost it." "The perfect princess with a temper after all," Lucas chuckled. His phone rang suddenly. He sat up when he saw the caller ID. "It's my financial crimes contact, Nadia. This could be promising." He answered, face intent, as Nadia spoke. I gnawed my nails nervously until Lucas ended the call with a satisfied grunt. Well, it seems our little stunt spurred some of the baby shower guests to come forward. Seems they've suspected Eliza and Max were up to shady business for a while now." I sat up eagerly. "What did they say?" Lucas's eyes gleamed. "That right around the time Eliza got pregnant, Max came into a lot of money. New cars, new house, but no one knew where it came from, and some of the funds were apparently being laundered." I clenched my fists as anger flooded through me. Of course Eliza would rope Max into illegal activity, too. Unbelievable. Is there proof? Nadia has a few leads. Lucas's expression turned steely. If those funds were obtained illegally, we'll find out. But my phone started vibrating with yet another call from Eliza. Before I could ignore, Lucas gently took my phone. "Let's give your sister a taste of her own drama, shall we?" he answered as I looked on nervously. "Eliza, what can I do for you?" Muffled shouting exploded through the speakers, and Lucas held the phone away from his ear with a smirk. I could make out a few screeched words. "Destroy you!" "How dare?" "Won't get away." Lucas just chuckled darkly once the shouts quieted. "Are you quite finished? Here is what's going to happen next, Eliza. I'm digging deep into yours and Max's affairs, and if I find even a hint of fraud, you'll have much bigger things to worry about than your reputation." He paused as Eliza tried to sputter out a response. "Oh, save it. For Arya's sake, I've let you get away with enough. That ends now." His voice lowered to a steely promise. "You'll be hearing from me soon." He ended the call on Eliza's screams. My heart pounded as I met his fiery stare. This is really happening. We could actually take her down. I gripped Lucas's hands tightly. "Thank you for standing up for me. Finally facing my tormentor after all these years, I felt empowered, unstoppable with him by my side." Lucas caressed my face gently. "Always, my love. Our family comes first now." His eyes hardened, and we protect our own. Over the next few weeks, Lucas dove headfirst into investigating Eliza and Max's financial history. He spent late nights poring over records, meeting with contacts, chasing leads. I caught him furiously scribbling on his conspiracy board when I went to call him for dinner. "Any breaks in the case?" I'd ask. Lucas would just tap his nose. "It's all coming together, but we're going to need more concrete evidence soon." His eyes took on a ruthless glint that sent a secret thrill through me. Lucas was always professional and ethical in his police cases. Seeing him embrace such ruthless determination for my sake made me love him even more. Finally, one night over dinner, he beckoned me close with excitement gleaming in his eyes. "I've found something big," he whispered so Lily wouldn't overhear. "A paper trail linking Max to an offshore holding company that's definitely a front. Funds come flowing in weekly, get bounced around different charities, and wind up in Max and Eliza's pockets." I finished in disgust. "So it is illegal money laundering." Lucas nodded. "Almost certainly fraud. Could be dealing with some dangerous people, too. But," he held up a hand before I could interrupt, "I haven't found concrete proof yet, just hints." His expression grew serious. "We'll need access to Max's home office, his computer. It's risky, but if I can get physical evidence, accounts, transactions, contacts, we can take it to the police and blow this whole operation open. Apprehension and excitement dueled within me. Like breaking and entering? I clarified nervously. Lucas squeezed my hands, eyes blazing. I wouldn't ask if it wasn't important. Think of Lily. At her name, my heart steeled itself. I would do anything to protect our daughter. Okay, let's do this. We made plans for Lucas to sneak into Max's office the next day while Eliza had a prenatal appointment and Max was at work. My heart pounded as I dropped Lucas off down the block the next morning. He gave me a hard kiss. See you soon with the evidence to bury them for good. An hour later, his blunt text came through. Got it? Relief flooded through me, followed swiftly by adrenaline as I realized this was really happening. After today, Eliza and Max's facade would come crashing down for good. I was thrumming with nervous energy when Lucas climbed back into the car, manila envelope tucked carefully under his jacket. Wordlessly, he passed it to me. I opened it with trembling fingers to see Max's financial records, emails with shady contacts, everything we needed to expose the truth. We did it. I breathed. Lucas's eyes mirrored my exhilaration. Let's go end this. Lucas called in a favor from one of his trusted police captains, Mike, to help us take Eliza and Max down. We filled him in and showed him the evidence. His lips got thinner and thinner. These are very dangerous people your family's gotten mixed up with, he said gravely. We laid out a sting operation to catch Eliza and Max red-handed. Tomorrow, when Max went to collect one of his charity deposits, the cops would be waiting. That night I lay awake, heart pounding with anticipation, fear and elation. Lucas soothed me with strong hands, kissing away my tension until I slept. We dropped Lily at my mother's the next morning, so she'd be safe. Lucas, Mike, and a team of undercover cops set off to secretly stake out Eliza and Max's mansion, getting into position. Finally, my phone lit up with a single word from Lucas. Go. Hands trembling, I punched in Eliza's number. She answered with a suspicious, "What?" I took a breath, hiding my nerves. I want to talk. Clear the air if you're open to it. Lucas coached me on how to reel her in. A long pause before Eliza sighed loudly. Fine, just you though. Come over now if you're coming. She hung up without waiting for a reply. Gotcha. I drove to her mansion, shock nerve electric, rehearsing my lines. The cops' vans were well concealed as I walked up and knocked sharply. Eliza opened the door, belly rounded. She eyed me warily. Well, you wanted to talk, so talk. I cleared my throat. I'm sorry about how things went down. The shower, me accusing you. I should have talked privately first. Lucas said laying it on thick was crucial. Eliza looked slightly mollified. She stepped aside in wordless invitation. I hid a triumphant smile as I walked inside, blood roaring in my ears. She took the bait. Your move, Lucas. We sat across from each other in the living room I'd helped decorate, once upon a time. Before Eliza ruined everything. I took a deep breath. I need to know one thing. The money, where does it actually come from? I asked bluntly. I won't judge. I just want the truth. Come on, Eliza. Trust me, just this once. Eliza shifted with a mix of nerves and defiance. When she finally spoke, her voice came out strained. If you must know, Max has been doing some consulting work for some very influential people overseas. Code words spilled from her lips. Overseas clients, charity projects, consulting fees. With each damning phrase, my heart pounded harder. We had her. I hid a smile and leaned forward, the picture of understanding. I'm glad Max found new work. We all do what we must. I patted her hand, ignoring her surprise. Now, can I please use your bathroom? I walked steadily through the mansion as if I still knew its halls by heart, right to the home office where I knew the cops were lying in wait. Eliza followed, suspicion creeping into her voice. Why this bathroom? Mine is closer. I paused outside the office, bracing myself. You'll see in just a moment. Then I shoved the door open to utter chaos within. Police! Get down, now! Everything erupted at once. Police swarming a stunned Max by his computer, Eliza shrieking as an officer arrested her, Lucas striding out to grip me in a fierce hug. You did wonderfully, love, he murmured proudly before going to coordinate with Mike. I watched, knees weak, as Max and Eliza were dragged away in handcuffs, their wealth and status no match for true justice. In the aftermath, Lucas and I gave our statements, handing over the evidence that sealed the guilty verdict at their trial. Fraud, money laundering, racketeering. Eliza screamed venom at me until the end, while Max just glared silently. The judge showed no leniency, sentencing them both to 10 years behind bars. I held my head high as Eliza was led away, her baby bump and diamond rings no shelter from cold steel cuffs. She'd lost everything, her mansion sold off, bank accounts frozen, high society friends abandoning her. Exactly as she deserved. Lucas wrapped an arm around me as we left the courthouse, flashes going off around us. "How do you feel, love?" I took a deep breath of the crisp air, feeling freer than I had in years. "It's finally over. She can't hurt me or anyone else again." I smiled up at my husband, my champion. "We won." He pulled me into a fiery kiss before tucking me under his arm. "Now, I believe a celebration is in order. Lily's waiting." That night after Lily was asleep, Lucas popped open a bottle of champagne. As we cuddled together sipping bubbly, he raised his glass. "To new beginnings. Now your future is wide open, without toxic ties dragging you down. We can start fresh, the three of us." I clinked his glass gently. The coming years unfurled before me, peaceful and bright. I can finally close that dark chapter for good. Eliza wanted my life. Now she can live with the consequences of her greed. I shook my head ruefully. I almost feel sorry for her baby. Don't waste pity on them. Lucas lifted my knuckles to his lips. The only ones who deserve your energy now are Lily and I. Laying in his arms later that night, I sent out a silent thanks to whoever decided to make this wonderful man my soulmate, for guiding me through the darkness back into the light. Now the future held nothing but hope and joy with my little family beside me. I snuggled deeper into Lucas's embrace with a smile. After years of anguish, I could finally sleep easy. The past was nothing but dust. Ahead lay only bright skies. "How quaint," my sister Clara said, her voice dripping with contempt as she eyed my dusty overalls. I had just stepped off the red-eye from Nebraska and hadn't even had a chance to shower before being whisked off to the welcome dinner for my sister's posh New York wedding. Clara looked pristine as always in her designer dress and impeccable updo, sitting next to her smarmy fiancé Mark at the head of the long dining table. Mom shot me a weary look. We weren't accustomed to such finery, having lived simple farm lives back home. Dad stared straight ahead, jaw clenched. "It's just Clara's little joke," Mark said with an indulgent chuckle. "I think it's charming that Lena here helps out on the farm. Gets her hands dirty, doesn't she?" My face burned. I opened my mouth to respond, but Dad's hand on my arm stopped me. "Why don't you tell us about the farm, Lena?" Mark prompted. "Clara doesn't like to dwell on the past, but I'd love to hear how you spend your days." All eyes turned to me as I fumbled for words. Clara and Mark's wealthy friends waited expectantly, lips pursed as if poised to smirk at my unsophisticated life. "Well, we milk the cows every morning," I began. "By hand," a woman named Vivian cut in. "How precious." The table erupted into patronizing chuckles. Mom's eyes glistened. "Now, Vivian," Clara chided lightly, "we mustn't embarrass Lena. Not everyone can afford certain luxuries." My face burned hotter, but before I could respond, Dad slammed his fist on the table. "That's enough," he bellowed. The laughter died instantly. "We may not have your money, but we can sure as hell teach you a thing or two about decency." He stood abruptly and stormed out, Mom rushing after him. Clara didn't move, just swirled her wine glass lazily. "So dramatic," she sighed. "I suppose that's what happens when you waste your life in a rural backwater." Something in me snapped. "You think you're better than us?" I seethed through gritted teeth. "Let me tell you something. That farm put food on the table your whole damn childhood. It clothed you, kept a roof over your head, and this is the thanks Mom and Dad get?" Clara arched one carefully sculpted eyebrow. "It's not my fault they didn't aspire to anything more. I'm finally getting married into a respectable family." She ran a proprietary hand over Mark's chest. "I won't make the same mistakes." Mark raised his glass. "To upward mobility," he toasted. Their friends tittered appreciatively. I saw red. Before I could stop myself, I swept Clara's crystal champagne flute off the table. It shattered dramatically on the marble floor. "Lena!" Clara shrieked, leaping up from her seat. "No, Clara," I seethed through gritted teeth. "You don't get to look down on the people who sacrificed everything for you. It's time someone teach you a real lesson in humility." I spun on my heel and rushed out, leaving shocked gasps in my wake. My hands still trembled with rage as I comforted my distraught parents back in our small, shabby hotel room. Clara's cruelty had only steeled my resolve. If she refused to appreciate her family, I would make her. One way or another, before this wedding was over, my dear sister would finally pay for her arrogance. The next few days were a flurry of wedding preparations. With Clara caught up in the minutiae of floral arrangements, menu tastings, and dress fittings, I was relegated to the background, more servant than sister, expected to fetch and carry, while Clara basked in the glow of playing bride-to-be. She barely spoke 2 words to me that didn't involve an order or complaint. As I helped address invitation after endless invitation, Clara prattled on to her maids of honor about the preparations like a general planning a military offensive. "No, the table linens must be ivory, not ecru," she was saying now, exasperated. "Honestly, must I do everything myself?" I gritted my teeth as I continued scribbling names and addresses. Clara knew nothing of doing things herself. She'd never gotten her hands dirty in her life. "Oh, Lena, don't smudge the ink," Clara chided as she peered over my shoulder. "Hurry up with those. I need help addressing the place cards next." I slammed my pen down. "Actually, I think I'll take a break," I said coldly. Before she could protest, I was out the door. My blood boiled as I roamed the manicured grounds of the lavish Hamptons estate Clara and Mark had rented for the wedding. Everywhere I turned, more extravagance confronted me. The small fortune wasted on flowers, champagne, and decor could have funded our farm for a year. And for what? A gaudy show of wealth and status. Clara didn't appreciate the true value of family. She was marrying Mark for his money and influence in her new social circle. Well, I would make sure her facade came crashing down. I found my parents resting in the shade of a large oak tree, my dad's fingers interlaced with my mom's. Clara hardly had time for them either, brushing them off whenever they tried embracing their only other daughter. My resolve hardened. She would not get away with hurting them like this. I returned inside and quietly snuck into Mark's study. Rifling through the drawers, I found bank statements and investment reports. I pocketed a few. Evidence of Mark's shady financials would make for a handy reveal at the wedding reception. Next, I dug up Clara's day planner and snapped photos highlighting her pretentious schedules and social calendar. Let's see how her fancy friends feel knowing they're accessories to flaunt, not true companions. My phone buzzed. Speak of the devil. "Where are you?" Clara's shrill voice demanded. "I'm not paying you to wander around all day. The place cards need addressing." I rolled my eyes. "On my way," I said evenly before hanging up. I tucked the evidence safely into my bag. "Soon, Clara, soon you'll wish you had treated your family better when you had the chance." The stage was set. My sister's arrogance would be her downfall. Over the next few days, my plan took shape. Clara's wedding would come crashing down in a blaze of exposed secrets and hypocrisy. I continued playing the role of dutiful sister in public, gritting my teeth through Clara's condescending barbs and imperious demands. But behind the scenes, I was gathering ammunition. My unlikely ally was the wedding planner, Samantha. We had instantly bonded over our shared frustration with Clara's tyrannical behavior. 200 roses in the centerpieces aren't enough. Apparently we need 300, Samantha fumed. Does she think money grows on trees? Want to take her down a peg? I asked casually. Samantha raised her eyebrows. What did you have in mind? Let's just say the wedding photos won't be quite as Pinterest perfect as Clara expects. A slow grin spread across Samantha's face. I'm listening. We plotted in hushed whispers when Clara wasn't around. Samantha recruited other vendors who'd been subjected to Clara's wrath, including the florist, the band, and the caterer. One glimpse of Mark's shady financial records had been enough to convince them. Piece by piece, I collected candid photos and video clips capturing Clara and Mark's true, arrogant, and conceited nature. A lifetime of pent-up resentment fueled me. My parents noticed a change in my demeanor and cornered me one afternoon in the garden. You seem distracted, honey, Mom said, worry creasing her brow. What are you planning? Dad asked outright. I sighed. No point hiding it from them. Don't worry, I said cryptically. I'm going to make sure Clara finally pays for looking down on this family. Dad frowned, but Mom squeezed my hand and nodded. Just be careful, she whispered. I knew they were hurting as much as I was. It was time to take a stand. The night before the rehearsal dinner, I snuck into the banquet hall early to meet with the staff. As we discussed logistics, I saw red lipstick smudged on a half-empty champagne glass on the head table. Interesting. I showed the photo to Samantha, whose eyes narrowed. That little of snake, she muttered. I always knew she was cheating. It was almost too perfect. Clara's sweet facade hid a rotten core. At the dinner, I surreptitiously filmed as she introduced Mark to her friends, fawning over him for show while flashing her alleged lover coy looks across the room. Gotcha. Afterwards, I added the evidence to my growing dossier. Clara's wedding was about to become a one-way ticket to public humiliation. Let's see how her elite circle reacted when they realized they'd been cozying up to a fraud. By the time I was done, Clara's reputation would be in tatters, and my family would finally have its revenge. The day before the wedding, I woke up filled with purpose. Today would involve neutralizing potential obstacles before executing my plan to humiliate Clara tomorrow. My first stop was the boutique where Clara was having her final dress fitting. I needed to get rid of her loyal minion and maid of honor, Jen. I found Jen sipping mimosas. Time to sow some doubt. Jen, I exclaimed, just who I wanted to see. I can't thank you enough for being Clara's rock through all this chaos. Jen preened. Of course I'd do anything for her. We've been best friends since college. Exactly, I said conspiratorially. Can I tell you something in confidence, as her sister? Jen leaned in eagerly. I'm worried about Clara and Mark, I said, feigning concern. Their relationship seems so transactional, you know? I even saw Mark getting cozy with another woman. Jen's eyes went wide. No, Clara said they're soulmates. She's dreamed of this wedding her whole life. I shook my head. I'm telling you as her sister, something seems off. Just keep your eyes open, okay? I'd hate to see Clara get hurt. Planting those seeds was all it took. By the time Clara finished her dress fitting, Jen was nowhere to be found. One down. Next was Mark himself. I found him reviewing seating charts. Showtime. Hey sis, Mark grinned smugly. Come to check everything meets your quaint standards? I ignored the jab. Actually, I wanted to apologize. I may have given folks the wrong impression about you. Mark blinked in surprise but quickly composed himself. Really? I appreciate that, Lena. Now to cast doubt. I can tell how much you love and respect Clara, I said, laying it on thick. All those fancy investors she's introducing you to, you'd never take advantage, right? Mark's eyes narrowed slightly before he laughed. Of course not. I'm all about family. He was a worse actor than I thought. Luckily, it didn't matter. Mark could now see me as a potential threat. Finally, I had to sabotage Clara's preparations. I found her sipping champagne while having her makeup done. Clara, you should reconsider those centerpieces, I said casually. White lilies would look so much better than roses. As expected, she flared up instantly. Excuse me? I picked ivory roses months ago. I shrugged. Oops, my mistake. Too late to change them, I guess. Clara's brow furrowed. Good. A tiny seed of superstitious doubt planted. She was too focused on bridezilla details to see the bigger picture. Everything was in place for the main event. Just one more day before Clara's entire facade collapsed. My pulse quickened. After tomorrow, my family would finally have justice. The night before Clara's wedding, I could hardly sleep, too wired with anticipation for the coming day. In the darkness, I reviewed the damning evidence against my sister one final time. The credit card statements proving Mark's shady business deals. Testimonials from mistreated wedding vendors eager for payback. Even Clara's own petty commentary against her nearest and dearest. I had it all. At dawn, I slipped out to the garden to watch the sunrise. Today was Judgment Day. My thoughts were interrupted by footsteps on the gravel behind me. I whirled around to see Clara standing there in her silk robe, arms crossed. Well, what are you hiding? She demanded. Of course, she must have noticed my repeated whispered conversations and furtive movements these past days. I quickly composed myself. Just wedding jitters, I said lightly. I want everything to go perfectly for you, sis. Clara's eyes narrowed. I don't believe you. Spill it. When I stayed silent, her face flushed with rage. She grabbed my arm roughly. Tell me what you're planning right now, she hissed, all pretense of civility gone. Behind the mask of the polished socialite lurked my sister's real petty, domineering nature. I wrenched my arm from her grasp. Take your hands off me, I spat. I don't answer to you. We stood there, eyes locked, the growing dawnlight illuminating Clara's reddening face. Have it your way, she said coldly. But if you ruin things for me, I'll make you pay. I stepped close until we were nose to nose. "Too late for that," I said quietly. "You've been the one making Mom and Dad pay your whole life. It ends today." I stormed off before she could respond, adrenaline coursing through me. Only a few more hours now. My expose would ruin Clara socially and financially. Let's see how her so-called friends reacted when they realized she was a shallow, materialistic fraud. She deserved it after a lifetime of looking down on us. I almost wished I could see her reaction when it happened, the dawning humiliation and panic as her facade collapsed. But I couldn't risk being caught prematurely. I would be far away by the time Clara's world came crashing down. Until then, I had to play it cool. Clara's suspicions meant I needed an ironclad alibi when things went down at the reception. Luckily, Jen was easy enough to manipulate. A few vague hints about concerns regarding Clara was enough to provoke an epic meltdown. Right on schedule, Jen barged into Clara's suite, sobbing about duplicity and betrayal. While Clara desperately tried to salvage her closest friendship before walking down the aisle, I made my escape. I had an important video to prepare and send anonymously when the time was right. Soon, Clara, your judgment day is at hand. Get ready to reap what you've sown. The day of Clara's wedding dawned bright and clear. Inside, however, a storm was brewing. As Clara glided down the aisle on my father's arm, smiling radiantly, I maintained a pleasant facade. But inside, my heart hammered with anticipation. The ceremony proceeded smoothly. If Clara suspected anything amiss, she hid it well behind her practiced porcelain smile. At last, it was time. As waiters began circulating with champagne at the reception, I slipped away to make the call. Moments later, the projector flickered on, casting an enlarged video onto the blank wall behind the head table. For one blissful moment, Clara's smile persisted, oblivious. Then chaos erupted. On screen, grainy footage showed Mark kissing a woman who was distinctly not my sister. Gasps and shouts filled the air as all eyes turned to the front. Clara's pristine smile had frozen, lips parted in horror. Mark lunged for the projector, but shoved him back into his seat. "You lying piece of filth!" The raw fury in her voice was terrifying to behold. "How dare you?" Mark stammered meaningless denials, but Clara was no longer listening. Her burning glare turned to the crowd who watched, transfixed and murmuring. "As for the rest of you backstabbing vipers," she seethed, "let's see how you like hearing what I really think of you all." With that, the video changed to show Clara at the bridal boutique, trash-talking guests by name. "Charles acts so enlightened, but he slept with half of Manhattan." "Oh, please. We all know Alexandra bought her way into the symphony board. That cow Vivian is just obsessed with me." It went on, Clara mercilessly shredding apart the facade of polite society and so-called friendships. I watched, transfixed, as these arrogant snobs reacted with slack-jawed shock at her vitriol. Murmurs turned to outraged shouts. "How could you?" Vivian cried, aghast. "I thought we were friends." Alexandra stood abruptly. "I won't stand here and listen to these lies." She stormed away, others moving to follow. The tableau of Clara's public evisceration was even sweeter than I imagined. I drank it in, watching with quiet satisfaction as her privileged world crumbled to dust, until Clara's wild gaze fixed on me. In 2 strides, she crossed the space between us and struck me hard across the face. "You!" she snarled. "I should have known you'd try to ruin everything, you jealous little—" Whatever she planned to say next was lost as Mark grabbed her arm and snapped, "Enough!" To the remaining guests, he announced, "The wedding is off." Gasps rippled through the room. In the ensuing stunned silence, Mark turned on his heel and walked away. Clara stood motionless amid the ruins of her sham marriage and reputation. Her eyes met mine one final time, burning with impotent rage. Then she turned and fled. It was over. I had my revenge at last. Clara finally knew how it felt to have her world humiliated and exposed without mercy. For a moment, I thought I would feel triumphant. Instead, as I gazed out at the destruction I had wrought, an empty sadness overcame me. This was justice, but not redemption. My sister was not the only one with lessons to learn. As Clara's ruined wedding lay in ashes around me, I realized my own path forward remained unclear. In the chaotic aftermath of Clara's ruined wedding, I slipped away unnoticed. I knew she would come looking for me soon, crazed with anger and humiliation. Sure enough, I had just reached my room when Clara burst through the door, eyes ablaze. "You!" She advanced on me, hand raised to strike again. I want you gone. Your petty jealousy has cost me everything. I stood my ground. Look closer, Clara. I'm not the one who brought this on yourself. Don't you dare, she shrieked. I was finally becoming someone, marrying into a good family, not like the nobodies we come from. Her words stung, but I held firm. Is that all that matters to you? Status and money? What about finding real meaning in life? Clara let out a hollow, bitter laugh. Don't lecture me about meaning. Real life isn't some quaint middle American fantasy. I thought you were jealous of my perfect life. Perfect? I spat back. It was a sham built on deceit and vanity. Clara flinched at the harsh truth. For a moment her haughty mask slipped, revealing the scared, insecure girl within, but then her eyes hardened again. Get out, she hissed, blind fury returning. I never want to see you again. She stormed out, slamming the door behind her. I stood there shaking, the weight of what I had destroyed hitting me. A soft knock interrupted my thoughts. It was Samantha, the wedding planner. Her smile was bittersweet. Quite a day, huh? She said wryly. I'm almost sorry it's over. I let out a shaky laugh. It's for the best. Clara needs to change. Samantha nodded. Hopefully she learns her lesson. And what about you? I looked away. I didn't regret exposing Clara, but doubts were creeping in. I need time to think, I said quietly. Samantha squeezed my shoulder. Whenever you're ready, there are good people waiting. With that, she left. I wish I shared her optimism. Clara was right. I had been jealous of her seemingly perfect life. I realized now no life is perfect, only meaningful if lived with humility and compassion. The path forward would not be easy for either of us. But as I watched Clara's borrowed Bentley disappear down the gravel driveway, this time for good, I knew one thing was certain. Our sibling relationship was shattered forever. For better or worse, things would never be the same again. In the weeks following Clara's failed wedding, the gossip rags had a field day, mocking Manhattan's runaway bride. Her picture graced their covers for a week straight before some other society scandal took over. I read the headlines with a sort of numb ambivalence. I had wanted to see Clara humbled and brought low. Yet now that she was, I felt neither vindication nor satisfaction, only sadness for what our family had become. My parents tiptoed around me, unsure what to say after everything that had happened. The unspoken distance between us was worse than any lecture. 2 weeks later, I still hadn't left New York. I kept replaying the sequence of events in my head, wishing I could unravel the tangled knot of sisterhood, jealousy, and retribution that had led us here. One day, as I wandered aimlessly through Central Park, my thoughts were interrupted by a familiar voice. Lena? Is that you? I turned in surprise to see Samantha hurrying towards me, beaming. In spite of myself, I smiled back. Samantha's warm caring was a balm amidst the emotional wreckage. We fell easily into conversation, strolling together around the pond as she caught me up on wedding gossip. Finally she paused, expression growing serious. Forgive me for prying, but you seem burdened, she said gently. Have you reconciled with Clara yet? I let out a harsh, brittle laugh. Clara and I are done. She'll never forgive me. Samantha squeezed my shoulder. She will in time, when she's ready to change. I shook my head bitterly. Clara won't change who she is. I need to accept that. But you can change who you are, Samantha said. Leave jealousy and pettiness behind. Forgive others and yourself. Her words resonated within me. I had always thought Clara was the problem in our relationship. Only now did I see my own flaws clearly. In that moment, something shifted inside me. I saw a chance to let go of resentment and embrace empathy. My soul felt lighter than it had in years. I turned and hugged Samantha fiercely. Thank you, I whispered. I think I'm finally ready to go home. The next morning I bid my parents a loving goodbye, promising to visit soon. As I boarded my flight back, the possibilities of the future stretched out ahead of me, rewritten. I didn't know if Clara would ever let go of her anger, but I could let go of mine. That was change enough for now. The wheels lifted off, leaving behind the weight of my sisterly grudge. When I returned home, there was a lightness in my step that hadn't been there before. Who knew what life held next? For today I was simply grateful for the wisdom I had found and the compassion I now carried within.